I've always believed the road could test a person more than anything else in life. Not just the asphalt stretching for miles, not just the weather battering down on the windshield, but the silence that comes when you park your RV in a place you weren't sure you should be. The silence that feels alive, like it's leaning against the walls of your rig, waiting for you to notice. That silence has broken stronger men than me. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I think it broke me too. My name's Aaron. I'm 43, and for most of my life, I've been drawn to the kind of freedom that only comes with wheels under you and an empty horizon ahead. I learned early that campgrounds, with their bright lanterns and friendly chatter, were only one version of the camping life. There was another version, a darker one, quieter, lonelier, hidden. They call it boondocking. Some folks dress it up as stealth camping, making it sound daring, rebellious. But let me tell you something. When you've pulled off into a forgotten dirt road at 2 a.m, cut the engine, and killed the lights, it doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like trespassing into something bigger than you. I'd been doing it for years before I admitted that. For me, it started out practical. I didn't always want to pay for a hookup or park shoulder to shoulder with retirees who left their porch lights on all night. I wanted silence, solitude, and the kind of wildness that you can only find when you step out of your RV and hear nothing but the beating of your own heart. And I found it, plenty of times. But mixed into those nights are the ones I can't forget. The nights when I should have listened to my instincts, should have left the keys in the ignition and kept driving. One of the first times it really hit me, I was somewhere outside of Moab, Utah. Red dirt roads spider-webbed out from the highway, some leading to legitimate campsites, others to nowhere at all. I'd pulled off one of those spurs after sunset, chasing the last bit of daylight until I found a flat spot between two towering sandstone cliffs. It felt perfect. Sheltered, quiet, hidden. Exactly the kind of place I told myself I liked. I parked, shut down, and stepped out into the cooling desert air. The rocks still radiated heat from the day, and the silence was so thick it pressed against my ears. At first, I breathed it in like medicine. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the desert does after a long, hot day. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked a slow circle around the RV, just soaking it all in. But then, standing in the shadow of those cliffs, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not danger exactly, more like awareness. Like the land itself had noticed me. I shook it off. Desert nights can do that, trick your mind into filling silence with meaning. But later, when I was lying in bed, I swore I heard a sound outside. Not footsteps, not an animal. More like a knock, soft, deliberate. It came once, then silence. I froze, every nerve firing. Another knock, closer this time against the side panel of the RV. I sat up, held my breath. Desert air slipped through the cracked window, carrying nothing but silence. I told myself it was rocks shifting with the night air, the cooling stone echoing against the walls. I told myself anything I could, because the alternative meant something, or someone was out there. I didn't sleep much. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I'd hear something. A scrape, a whisper of gravel, the creak of metal that didn't come from inside. By dawn, I was half delirious, convinced I'd made it all up. When I opened the door, the desert was exactly as it should have been, empty, still, endless. Except for one thing. Right in the dirt, just below my step, was the mark of a boot heel. Not mine. Not fresh enough to be from that morning, but not old either. It faced the RV, pointed directly at my door. I got out of there fast, told myself it was just some hiker who'd wandered through before me. But I knew better. Out there, miles from any trail, in a slot of land no map marked as a campsite, somebody had stood watching me sleep. That wasn't the last time. Over the years, I've collected these moments like scars. Nights when stealth camping went from adventure to nightmare, when the dark seemed to close in and every sound became a threat. Once in the forests of Washington, I woke to the sound of branches snapping in slow succession, moving in a circle around my RV like something, or someone was pacing me. I sat at the window with a flashlight in my shaking hand, afraid to turn it on, afraid to see a face staring back. By morning, the ground outside was littered with broken twigs, but no tracks, like the forest had rearranged itself in the night just to remind me it could. Another time, down near the Texas border, I parked behind an abandoned gas station, thinking it would be quiet, out of sight. Sometime past midnight, I woke to headlights flooding through the windshield. A truck idled there, its engine low and mean. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The lights clicked off, and for a long stretch of silence, I thought maybe it had gone. Then I heard boots crunching across gravel. A man's shadow crossed past my window, pausing just long enough that I knew he was looking in. My hand hovered over the horn, over the ignition, but I stayed still, praying he'd leave. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated, the truck roared back to life, and he was gone. But I never slept there again. I've come to believe that stealth camping strips you down to your rawest instincts. It forces you to face what you really are in the dark: prey, fragile, temporary. The RV walls might feel like safety, but they're just thin panels of metal and wood. They don't stop the silence from pressing in, don't stop the knowledge that if someone or something wanted you, there's not much you could do about it. And yet, I kept doing it. Because there's something in us that hungers for that edge, that silence. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's stupidity, or maybe it's just the human need to test ourselves against the unknown. But the truth is, sometimes the unknown tests back. That's what I want to share with you. Not just one story, not just one night, but the weight of them all. The way they built up inside me until I couldn't pretend anymore that stealth camping was just harmless fun. These are the nights when the silence wasn't empty. These are the nights when I realized that out there, off-grid and unseen, I wasn't the one watching. I was the one being watched. I can tell you about the night I nearly gave up camping altogether. It was late September, and I was in Arizona, cutting across long stretches of desert highway where the only landmarks are saguaros and forgotten fence lines. I'd driven too long that day, watching the sun fall behind my rearview mirror until my eyes ached. By the time I decided to stop, the road had gone black and the stars were cold pinpricks in the sky. There wasn't a town for miles, no gas station lights, no campground. Just me, my RV, and the endless dark. I pulled off onto a dirt track, barely visible under the headlights, and followed it until the road broke into hard-packed earth. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, like someone had pulled the plug on reality. The night air was dry, cooler than it had any right to be, and it carried a faint, sour smell I couldn't place. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, but the beam caught nothing except dust motes. No coyotes yipping in the distance, no insects buzzing, just stillness so heavy it pressed on my skin. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had screamed that I wasn't welcome. But exhaustion makes fools of all of us. I locked the door, crawled into bed, and told myself it was fine. That's the thing about RV walls. You convince yourself they're enough to separate you from the night. But they aren't. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a sound. Not a knock this time. Not a branch. Breathing. Ragged, uneven breathing, just outside my window. My body froze under the thin blanket, heart slamming so hard I thought it might rattle the frame. The breath grew louder, closer, until I swore I felt the window fogging with each exhale. I sat there paralyzed, mind racing. Was it an animal? But no, the rhythm was wrong. Too human. Too deliberate. I reached for my phone, but the battery had died earlier in the evening. The silence inside the RV was unbearable, broken only by that slow, dragging breath. And then it stopped. I counted seconds, each one stretching into eternity. My hand crept toward the ignition keys. I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined it when the RV shifted. Not from wind, from weight. Something had climbed onto the back bumper. The springs groaned under the added pressure, the entire rig rocking ever so slightly. I couldn't take it. I jammed the keys into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. Headlights cut across the desert scrub, but nothing was there. Nothing I could see anyway. The rocking stopped. I slammed the RV into gear, wheels spitting gravel as I tore back down that dirt track onto the highway. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of a town at dawn, and even then, I didn't feel safe. That night taught me something. Boondocking isn't just about solitude, it's about vulnerability. When you're out there, hidden from sight, you're not invisible, you're exposed. There are things, people, animals, or worse, that find you more easily when you've tucked yourself away where no one else dares to go. But the worst came later. On a trip to the mountains in Colorado, I'd heard about a trail where you could park off-grid, surrounded by pines with views of the peaks if you found the right clearing. It sounded like heaven, and I wanted it badly after too many nights of gas station parking lots and noisy campgrounds. The road wound steeply upward, the trees closing in until the sky was nothing but slivers of blue. By the time I found a flat clearing big enough to park, the shadows had swallowed the forest whole. At first, it was peaceful. The air smelled sharp and clean, pine needles crunching under my boots as I walked a small perimeter. I felt alone but not unwelcome, like the forest was indifferent to me. I cooked a quick meal, settled in, and let the silence wash over me. But silence in the forest isn't really silence. It's absence, the absence of birds, the absence of wind, the absence of anything living. And that's what I noticed first, that the forest wasn't alive around me. No owls calling, no crickets, no rustle of small creatures, just the stillness of a place holding its breath. Later, lying in bed, I started to hear it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching the pine needles. They circled the RV once, twice, pausing by the door each time. My throat went dry, but I told myself it could be a deer. Maybe even a bear, though the steps sounded too steady, too measured. I stayed still, gripping a knife I kept by the bed, praying it would pass. And then came the whisper. Not words I could understand, but a hiss of sound pressed close against the window. My blood turned cold. I snapped on a light, heart hammering, but the clearing outside was empty. The footsteps had stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak, every groan of the RV frame became a threat. By dawn, my eyes felt raw, but I stepped outside anyway, desperate to see tracks, anything to prove what I'd heard. The ground should have shown something, but there was nothing, not one mark in the pine needles. I drove away shaken, and for the first time, I questioned whether this lifestyle was worth it, whether the freedom of the open road justified the terror that sometimes came with it. But I kept going, because that's what I do, and I kept collecting stories, each one darker than the last. The truth is, stealth camping reveals parts of yourself you might not want to see. The part of you that doubts your senses, that second guesses your instincts. The part that knows deep down you're not alone, even when you can't prove it. It's not just about the danger outside the RV. It's about the battle inside your own head, the fight between reason and fear. I've lain awake on countless nights asking myself, am I imagining this? Am I broken from too many lonely miles? Or is the silence out there really alive, pressing against my skin, reminding me that I don't belong? And sometimes, the answer comes in ways you can't ignore. There's one night that keeps me awake even now, years later. The one I don't talk about much because it rattled me so badly that I almost sold the RV and walked away from the road entirely. If the earlier nights were warnings, this was a reckoning. It happened in New Mexico, like not far from the Carson National Forest. I'd been driving long, empty stretches of highway where the land rolls in soft waves and the sky feels so big it swallows you whole. I stopped in a small town for fuel, grabbed some groceries, and decided I'd push out into the wilderness before nightfall. I wanted space, freedom, silence. The same old hunger that kept pulling me off the main road. I found a dirt track just before dusk, one of those roads that looks like it hasn't been driven in months. I followed it several miles until the sagebrush thinned and the land opened into a flat, wide plateau. From where I parked, I could see the last sunlight washing over the horizon in deep orange, painting the earth in fire. It was beautiful, almost holy, and for a moment I thought maybe this was the kind of place where a man could finally feel peace. But peace didn't last long. The first strange thing was the smell. At twilight, when the air cooled, a stench rolled across the plateau like something souring in the dirt. It reminded me of wet metal mixed with rotting wood. I checked the cupboards, the fridge, even the vents, thinking maybe something had spoiled inside. Nothing. The smell wasn't in the RV, it was outside. Heavy. Thick. Like the desert itself had exhaled something foul. Then came the lights. Small, flickering pinpricks on the far side of the plateau. At first, I thought they were distant campfires, maybe another group of travelers tucked away on the other side. But as the dark deepened, I realized they weren't campfires at all. They were moving, darting between the sagebrush, sometimes 2 or 3 together, sometimes just one alone, bobbing low like lanterns carried by hands. But there was no smoke, no sound, just light, slipping in and out of view. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe ranchers out with headlamps, maybe kids with flashlights, anything but what my gut told me, that those lights weren't meant for me to see, that they were something older, stranger, moving in patterns I couldn't understand. I shut the curtains and told myself to sleep. But sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. Slow, deliberate, circling steps. My blood went cold. I reached for the knife I always kept by the bed, gripping the handle so hard my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped right by the door. That's when the knocking began. Not soft, not testing. 3 sharp knocks, steady and deliberate. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Another 3 knocks, harder this time, shaking the thin panel of the door. Whoever, or whatever it was, it knew I was inside. I should have started the engine, should have peeled out of there. But fear rooted me in place. I sat frozen, knife in hand, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. And then, in the silence between the knocks, I heard my name. Not shouted, whispered, drawn out in a voice I didn't recognize, low and rasping. Aaron. I felt the air leave my lungs. Nobody out here knew me. Nobody should have known my name. My mind scrambled for answers. Maybe I'd talked too much in town. Maybe someone had followed me. But the voice didn't sound like a man's voice. It sounded wrong, like words dragged through gravel. Another knock. Harder. The whole RV shuddered. That broke me. I lunged for the ignition, turned the key, and the engine roared awake. Headlights blasted across the sagebrush. I expected to see someone standing there, but the clearing was empty. Not a soul, not a shadow. Only the scrub dancing in the beams. But the smell, God, the smell was stronger now, flooding through the vents, metallic and rotten, choking me until my stomach turned. I slammed the RV into drive and tore down that dirt road, tires spitting rocks into the dark. I didn't care if I wrecked the rig. I just needed out. I didn't stop until I hit the highway again, white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes darting to the mirrors. And here's the thing I'll never forget. As I sped away, I looked back at the plateau. In the glow of my taillights, dozens of those flickering lights rose up out of the brush, bobbing and swaying like they'd been waiting for me to leave. I drove until sunrise, shaking, throat raw from breathing in that stench. I parked at a crowded truck stop, surrounded by the noise of diesel engines and people moving around, and for once, that chaos felt safer than silence. I sat in the driver's seat until daylight, staring at the door, waiting for another knock. But it never came. That night changed something in me. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was dread, the kind that burrows deep, that whispers you're not just unlucky, you're marked. Because what I heard out there, what I smelled, what I saw in those lights, it wasn't random. It wasn't some drunk rancher or curious animal. It was deliberate, and it wanted me to know. After that, every time I pulled off the road, I hesitated. My hands would grip the wheel, knuckles white, while my mind replayed those knocks, that whisper of my name. Sometimes I'd keep driving, exhausted, until I found the safety of a rest stop. Other times, I gave in to the old hunger and parked in the middle of nowhere, convincing myself it would be different this time. But it never was. Because once you've been noticed out there, once the silence has spoken back to you, you realize you're not the one choosing anymore. The road chooses. The night chooses. And sometimes, you're not welcome. After New Mexico, I started to think I was done. My hands would tremble on the wheel whenever I saw a dirt spur off the highway, the kind of path I used to chase like a calling. I told myself I'd stick to campgrounds, to crowded rest stops, to the glow of streetlights that made me feel human again. But the road has a way of testing promises like that. Sooner or later, you're tired, you're desperate, and you give in. That test came a few months later in Nevada. I'd been driving since early morning, the desert sun hammering down, and by nightfall, I was too far from any campground worth the detour. The highway stretched empty in every direction, no headlights behind me, no taillights ahead. When I spotted a dirt service road disappearing off to the right, I told myself it was just for the night, just a few hours of rest. The road ended in a dry wash, hemmed in by brittle sagebrush and jagged boulders. It wasn't much, but it was flat, hidden from the highway, quiet, the kind of place I used to crave. I killed the engine, stepped out into the cool desert night, and listened. Nothing. Not even a breeze. The sky above was a riot of stars, so clear I could see the faint band of the Milky Way stretched like a scar across the heavens. It should have been beautiful, but my chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. Because I'd been here before, not this place exactly, but this moment, the stillness, the waiting silence, the sense that the night was watching me, just waiting for me to crawl into bed. I forced myself to sleep. Hours passed in fitful fragments, each dream fractured by the fear that I wasn't alone. At some point in the night, a sound jolted me upright. Not footsteps, not a knock this time, something worse. It was humming. Low, tuneless, steady. The kind of humming people do absent-mindedly when they're working with their hands. It drifted through the walls of the RV like smoke, faint but unmistakable. A human sound out here where no human should be. I froze, heart hammering, straining to catch the direction. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, swelling and fading like it circled the RV. My first thought was that I'd lost my mind, that maybe exhaustion had finally tipped me into hearing things. But then the humming stopped, and in the sudden silence that followed, I heard the sound of my own name again, whispered through the thin crack of the window. Aaron. My blood iced. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the knife I'd pulled from the drawer. I wanted to scream, to drive, to do anything but sit there in the dark. But fear held me still, nailed me to the bed while my breath sawed in and out of my chest. And then the RV rocked. It wasn't subtle this time. The whole rig lurched like something heavy had shoved against it. A pot clattered from the counter, rolled across the floor. I didn't think. I launched forward, slammed the ignition, floored the gas. Gravel exploded under the tires, the RV bucking as it tore down the wash. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The humming had stopped, but in its place came laughter. Faint, hollow, chasing me into the night. I don't remember how long I drove. Hours, maybe. My eyes burned, the wheels slick with sweat under my palms. I didn't care about the speed, didn't care if the RV shredded its suspension on the washboard road. I just needed out. By dawn, I found myself pulled over at a rest stop, slumped over the wheel, every nerve in my body wrung dry. And that was when it finally hit me. The weight of every night, every sound, every shadow. The knocks, the breathing, the whispers, the lights. They weren't coincidences. They weren't tricks of exhaustion or imagination. They were connected. A thread I'd been tugging every time I parked off the road, every time I stepped out into silence that didn't belong to me. The truth is, I don't know what lives out there. I don't know if it's people or something older or the land itself waking up to remind us it doesn't want us here, but I know this. When you camp alone, hidden from the world, you're not just finding solitude, you're opening yourself to being found. And I was found. It's been years since that last night in Nevada. I still drive, still camp, but I choose my spots differently now. I stick to the places where other voices carry in the dark, where lanterns burn, where laughter cuts through silence. Maybe it's cowardice. Maybe it's wisdom. All I know is that I've learned the road doesn't forgive pride. You think you're brave, you think you're invisible, and the night proves you wrong. Sometimes when I park at a crowded campground, I catch myself staring at the trees just beyond the glow of the firelight, and I swear, sometimes I hear it again, that faint, low humming drifting on the wind, like a reminder, like a promise. So here's what I'll leave you with, from one traveler to another. Freedom isn't free. Out here, it costs something. Sometimes it costs sleep, sometimes it costs peace. And if you're not careful, if you push too far into the dark, it can cost more than that. The silence will always be waiting. The question is, will you? The first thing you notice about Crater Lake is not its beauty, though that's what the brochures and postcards swear will strike you first. For me, it was the silence. A silence so deep it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. A silence that carried with it the sense that something was listening, not merely absent. My name is Eric Maddox, I'm 36, and I've been camping across the Northwest in an old RV I bought secondhand off a retired couple from Idaho. I thought I'd grown used to remote stillness, but nothing had prepared me for the oppressive quiet that hung over that cobalt water. It wasn't just silence, it was a hollow, as though sound itself had drowned there. I parked the RV along the rim road just before sundown, the lake glowing like molten glass beneath a bleeding sky. The plan was simple: spend 3 nights on the rim, hike down to Cleetwood Cove, maybe fish a little, then head north. But even as I leveled the RV, a gnawing unease was already at work under my skin. There was no wind, no rustle in the trees, no bird calls, just my footsteps crunching gravel, too loud, too sharp, like the world had been muted and I was the only thing still clattering around. I remember muttering to myself, "It's too quiet," but I brushed it off. When you travel alone, you have to get good at brushing things off. By the time I set up camp, shadows stretched long across the rim, painting the pumice cliffs in shades of purple and gray. I walked the short distance to a viewpoint and stood staring down at the water. The stillness unsettled me more the longer I looked. The lake was so perfectly calm, not a ripple anywhere like the surface of a mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw movement deep beneath the surface, something pale shifting in the blue. My eyes adjusted, and it was gone, just light and shadow, but I felt the hair on my arms prickle. I stayed longer than I should have, staring until the last of the sun slipped behind the crater walls. Only when the temperature dropped sharply did I retreat back to the RV, convincing myself that fatigue was twisting my senses. Night fell hard. I cooked a simple meal on the little stove, canned chili, bread, nothing special, and the smell filled the confined space. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone standing there, though I was alone on that stretch of road. I told myself it was nerves, the altitude, the quiet. Yet when I stepped outside to dump the dishwater, I froze. The silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was layered, something faint beneath it, like a hum. No, not a hum, more like voices. Faint, distant, impossible to make out. They rose and fell as though carried on water. I stood there holding the pot, staring toward the lake. It was pitch black, the kind of black that swallows detail. My ears strained for clarity, but the more I focused, the more uncertain I became. Was it wind seeping through the crater walls? Was it water lapping? But there was no breeze, no movement at all. I backed into the RV and locked the door, laughing nervously at myself, but the sound of my own laugh was brittle, unconvincing. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard it again. Whispers threading through the silence, as though the lake itself was speaking just below the threshold of hearing. By morning, exhaustion clung to me. Still, I pushed myself through a routine. Coffee on the stovetop, a quick bite, lacing up boots for the hike down to Cleetwood Cove. The trail was steep, switchbacking down to the water's edge, and with every step, the blue grew darker, heavier, like I was descending not into a lake, but into some vast, inverted sky. Down at the shoreline, the silence pressed even closer. I tossed a stone into the water and expected the sharp splash, the ripples spreading out, but the sound seemed swallowed whole. No echo. No lingering ripple. The water closed over as if it had consumed the stone entirely. I sat there for nearly an hour, trying to fish, but the unease never left me. At one point, I thought I saw shapes moving under the surface, long, slow arcs, as though something enormous passed far below. My rational mind said trout, shadows, tricks of light. But another part of me, a part I didn't like admitting existed, whispered otherwise. That part told me I shouldn't be there, that the lake was watching me the way I was watching it. I reeled in, packed up, and made the grueling climb back up the switchbacks. When I returned to the RV, a ranger truck was parked nearby. A woman stood beside it, tall, weathered, wearing a uniform with a badge that read M. Salazar. She greeted me politely, asked about my stay. I said everything was fine, though my voice betrayed fatigue. Then, almost without meaning to, I asked if the lake ever made sounds. Her expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Some people think they hear things, she said carefully. Water carries noise in strange ways. It was a reasonable answer, but her eyes didn't quite match her tone. She changed the subject quickly, warning me about steep cliffs and unstable ground, then left. Her reaction stuck with me. That hesitation, the way she avoided my question. The rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wandered the rim, took photos, tried to distract myself, but everywhere I went, the silence returned, broken only by the faint suggestion of those drowned whispers. As night approached again, I considered leaving early, but pride pinned me in place. I told myself I wouldn't let paranoia chase me away. The second night was worse. Around midnight, a knocking sound jolted me upright. Not loud, 3 sharp raps, like knuckles on wood. My first thought was someone at the RV door, but when I crept to the window, no one was there. The knocking came again, this time from the other side, near the back. I grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding, and flung the door open. Nothing. Just the cold night and the black outline of the crater walls. I circled the RV, beam shaking in my hands, but found no footprints, no sign of anyone. When I climbed back inside, I noticed something chilling. The knocking wasn't outside anymore. It was coming from underneath. Slow, deliberate thuds against the floorboards, like something tapping from below. I stood frozen, staring at the linoleum floor, my breath shallow. The knocks spaced out, faded, then stopped altogether. Minutes stretched on, and eventually I convinced myself it must have been the old RV settling on uneven ground, metal shifting in the cold. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Not when I lay back down and once again heard the faint threads of voices weaving through the silence. This time they seemed closer, clearer, as though rising directly from the lake and seeping through the ground itself. By the time dawn broke, I was unraveling. My eyes burned, my nerves were shot. I told myself I'd pack up and leave that morning, but something in me resisted. It felt almost insulting to run, like admitting defeat to a silence I couldn't explain. I lingered, making coffee, watching the lake shimmer in the early light. And that's when I noticed it. The surface wasn't still anymore. There were ripples spreading outward, concentric circles radiating from a point near the center. No boat, no wind. Just rings expanding wider and wider until they vanished. I stared so long I forgot my coffee, cold in my hand because as the ripples faded, the voices returned. Only this time they weren't faint. They were rising, layer upon layer, as if the lake itself had decided to speak. I clutched the edge of the RV counter, my fingers digging into the chipped laminate. The voices were clearer now, soft, melodic, almost coaxing, but layered with a tension that made my stomach twist. It wasn't words I could understand, just syllables and tones, like someone trying to speak through water, muffled yet insistent. I backed away from the window, convinced my mind was fracturing. But even as I told myself that, a rational part screamed, "No sane mind invents three-dimensional whispers in perfect spatial sync." They came from all around, yet beneath me too, like the earth and lake had merged into one listening entity. My rationalizations dissolved, leaving only the raw, prickling awareness that I was alone, and yet not alone. I forced myself to breathe, to remember that I'd survived far worse situations while traveling alone. My RV had been my fortress through forest fires in Oregon, snowstorms in Montana, even an unexpected flood in the Cascades. But none of those experiences carried the same creeping, intimate terror as Crater Lake. Here, the environment itself was the antagonist. It pressed on me, distorted my perception, whispered in rhythms I could feel more than hear. I made a decision. I had to confront the voices, not run. I grabbed my hiking poles, my flashlight, and my phone, though I knew reception was nearly non-existent on the rim, and stepped outside. The air was colder than the night before, the kind of cold that seeps into bones and refuses to leave. I followed the edge of the rim toward the viewpoint overlooking the lake, the ground uneven beneath my boots, the pine needles damp and yielding. With each step, the whispers intensified, threading between the trees, echoing off the cliffs in a way that made direction impossible. My heart raced, but there was a strange fascination too. I couldn't stop myself from moving forward, driven by a need to see the source of this impossible sound. I reached the point where the cliff dropped straight into the lake, and I froze. The water shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight, and now the whispers coalesced into something I could almost make sense of. A chorus of tones rising and falling in unison, like a song by something alive beneath the waves. I swallowed hard and shook my head. My instincts screamed to retreat, yet I couldn't turn away. Then I noticed movement, small, pale shapes just below the surface. They were humanoid, or close enough that my mind tried to rationalize it. Drowned swimmers caught in the water, reflections, hallucinations. The shapes drifted slowly, eerily synchronized, like they were performing a ritual that only the lake could host. The hair on my arms and neck bristled. I stepped closer, and suddenly, the temperature dropped further. My breath fogged, my hands trembled despite my layers of clothing, and the whispers surged into a cacophony, no longer soft or distant, but a torrent pressing against the edge of hearing. Then the shapes moved differently. One surged upward, breaking the water's mirror-like surface, not fully emerging, just a pale arm or hand, and I stumbled back in horror. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, illuminating nothing, just the glassy water. I realized then that I had no idea how far I'd stepped toward the edge. The ground beneath me was slick with frost, loose pumice crumbling beneath my boots. My heart jumped into my throat. I backed away, slipping once, catching myself on a tree, and the whispers abruptly stopped. Silence slammed back, heavier than before, and the shapes vanished as if they had never been. My entire body shook, and I realized I was gasping, sweat running down my spine despite the cold. I retreated to the RV, slamming the door behind me, fumbling with the locks. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to rationalize the impossible. Maybe it was hypothermia, maybe hallucinations, maybe some bizarre reflection from the cliffs. But I knew deep down none of that felt right. None of it explained the tactile awareness of presence, the intimate pressure of the whispers, the sudden cold that had nothing to do with the night air. And then, as if confirming my dread, a faint tapping began on the RV's roof, light, rhythmic, deliberate. My stomach turned. The lake was calling, or it had brought something with it, and now it was testing my defenses. I decided I couldn't stay another night. Packing up in the dark, my hands shaking, I shoved gear into the RV. The whispers resumed in low waves, brushing the edges of my consciousness, teasing, coaxing, almost guiding me. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, but the weight of it was undeniable, pressing down with an authority that made thought difficult. I fired up the engine, the hum of the old diesel almost comforting against the unnatural quiet, and inched down the rim road. Headlights illuminated nothing beyond the road's edge, cliffs dropping into darkness that seemed alive. Driving away, I realized I wasn't merely leaving Crater Lake. I was leaving a confrontation that had already altered my perception of reality. The whispers followed in fragments, fading only gradually, dissolving into the wind and the vibration of the engine. I tried to remember every detail, the shapes beneath the water, the rhythm of the tapping, the unbearable weight of silence. But the mind has a cruel way of editing trauma, and I knew even now, days later, that some pieces would remain forever inaccessible. By the time I reached a gas station on the outskirts of the park, where the lights buzzed and the air smelled faintly of diesel and coffee, I felt physically drained. I met another camper outside the convenience store and described in vague terms the unease, the whispers. He nodded sympathetically but didn't offer much. Some places, he said slowly, carry their own history. Crater Lake's got that. Old stories. People disappear. Some hear voices. Some don't. You did, though, huh? I swallowed hard, unsure whether to be comforted or terrified that my experience had a precedent. The drive north after that felt like moving through a fog of my own mind. Every mirror, every reflective surface seemed to hold a fragment of the lake's cobalt depth. My sleep was shallow, haunted by dreams of water pulling me downward, of whispering voices curling around my skull, repeating tones I could never fully recall. Even weeks later, I find myself avoiding still water, the silence of a calm lake raising hairs on my arms and a subtle panic in my chest. But I also carry a strange sense of awe, a recognition of the raw, unknowable presence I had glimpsed. I've returned to Crater Lake, briefly, during daylight, with friends in tow. I never heard the whispers again, never saw the pale shapes, but the memory remains vivid, a cautionary echo of what isolation, water, and silence can conspire to create. I learned that night how thin the boundary is between perception and reality, and how quickly it can bend under the weight of the unknown. I also learned the hardest lesson for a lone camper. Sometimes survival isn't about outrunning a threat, but enduring the awareness that the world is far stranger than any human imagination allows. And yet, despite every instinct screaming to avoid the lake, there's a pull I cannot explain. A fascination that humbles and terrifies in equal measure. The voices may be drowned, but they linger, a reminder that some places remember, some waters carry memory, and some silences are not empty. They are patient, waiting for the next visitor, brave enough or foolish enough to listen. The weeks after Crater Lake were a strange limbo. I went back to my normal routines, work, errands, meals, but everything carried a faint echo of that night. Even ordinary silence seemed loaded now, as if the world had an extra layer I could suddenly perceive. I tried to talk to friends, colleagues, anyone who would listen. I described the stillness, the shapes, the voices. Most smiled politely and changed the subject. A few, though, leaned in, sharing stories of strange sounds, lost hikers, and legends that had circulated among rangers for decades. I realized then that Crater Lake wasn't just a lake, it was a repository, a place that held memories of those who had disappeared, and perhaps even memories of the lake itself, conscious in some way beyond comprehension. I kept thinking about the pale forms in the water. They weren't human in the sense I could define, but neither were they entirely inhuman. My rational mind struggled to accept it, trying to label it as hallucination, as stress, as altitude sickness. But every memory, the rhythm of their movements, the way the water responded to them, refused reduction. And the whispers, they haunted me at odd moments, usually in deep quiet when I was driving late at night or lying awake in bed. I began keeping a journal, sketching the shapes I remembered, jotting down the tonal pattern of the voices. Sometimes I played recordings of water sounds from other lakes, and my stomach twisted as I imagined the faint echoes of those drowned tones rising again. Eventually, I decided to go back to Crater Lake, but differently. Not alone, not at night, not in the RV. I arranged to meet with Ranger Salazar again, the woman who had given me the first subtle warning. Her expression was calm but unreadable as I recounted what I had experienced. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the episodes without judgment, and then led me to an area along the rim I hadn't explored before. "You want to understand, right?" she asked, almost rhetorically. I did. Every fiber of me wanted to make sense of the unexplainable. She explained that Crater Lake had an unusual topography and microclimate. Sounds carried over the water differently. Beneath the surface, volcanic formations created subtle movements that could confuse perception. But she also admitted quietly, almost reluctantly, that some experiences defied explanation. Disappearances, voices, and strange reflections had been reported since the lake's formation, often by solitary campers drawn to its stillness. That day, under sunlight, the lake appeared normal, majestic, serene, almost inviting. I waded to the shoreline carefully, letting the water lap against my boots. And yet, as I knelt to touch the surface, I felt it. The subtle vibration, faint but insistent, as though the lake remembered. The voices didn't rise, but a presence pressed against my awareness. For the first time, I understood that the lake's memory wasn't malevolent. It was patient, indifferent to fear or reason. It simply existed, and those who approached alone at night sometimes encountered its persistence in ways that could overwhelm. I shivered, realizing that my near encounter with the shapes and whispers was not cruelty, it was proximity. The lake had tested me, measured my curiosity, my attention, my respect. On the drive away that day, I thought about all the lessons I had learned. Solitude in nature is a double-edged sword. It can grant reflection, calm, awe, but it can also expose the mind to its own fragilities. Fear is not just instinctual, it is interpretive, shaped by memory, expectation, and the subtle cues of environment. I had confronted something that defied reason and emerged alive, not because I understood it fully, but because I respected it, because I acknowledged the boundary between human perception and natural phenomena beyond control. That night, back in my RV parked miles from the crater, I slept for the first time without being haunted by whispers or tapping. Yet even in sleep, I dreamed of the lake, not with fear, but with a profound, almost spiritual awe. Months later, I returned once more, but only briefly and only with others. We camped in groups along the more populated sections during the day, never alone. I taught them the subtle lessons I had learned. Respect the silence, observe without assumption, never push curiosity into danger. They asked about the voices, the shapes, the tapping, and I answered with measured caution. Crater Lake still had the power to unsettle, to draw you into its mirrored depths. But the lesson I carried was clear. Survival in places like this isn't about conquering fear. It's about enduring it, acknowledging it, and letting awe temper panic. I named the journal I kept during that period Drowned Voices, and it became both a record and a warning. Every entry, every sketch, every tonal notation reminded me that some places remember those who encounter them, and that those memories can surface unexpectedly. I kept it close during future trips as a talisman against both arrogance and recklessness. I traveled afterward with a new awareness of how fragile perception is, how quickly the mind can twist reality when exposed to the unknown. And though I continued RV camping across the West, visiting remote lakes and forests, none of them carried the same weight, the same intimate tension of Crater Lake. Looking back now, I realize what Crater Lake taught me, that fear is not a failure and awe is not weakness. The lake's quiet, its mirrored surface, its whispers, they were a mirror to my own mind, a test of attention and humility. And somewhere deep beneath its glassy depths, the shapes, the voices, and the patient, unblinking presence remain, undisturbed and eternal. I've shared this story so others might approach such places with caution and respect, but also so they might recognize that the world holds wonders and terrors that do not conform to logic. There's a beauty in that unpredictability, a lesson in the drowned voices, a reminder that survival is as much about understanding your own limits as it is about avoiding danger. Even now, when I hear the faint hum of water against a dock or the sigh of a still lake in the evening, I feel a subtle thrill and a twinge of unease. It is a reminder that some places remain alive in memory long after we leave, that silence can speak in ways words cannot, and that the most profound experiences of nature are often those that cannot be fully explained. Crater Lake taught me that lesson in a way I will never forget, through fear, through awe, and through the drowned voices that echo still in the quiet of my mind. Even after all these months, I can still feel the pull of Crater Lake, a magnet that tugs at memory and imagination in equal measure. I find myself thinking about the night I nearly became part of it, staring at shapes beneath the water that should not have existed. Each time I close my eyes, I see the pale forms drifting in synchrony, hear the layered whispers threading through silence, and feel the oppressive weight of solitude that the lake imposes. The memory is vivid, but it has shifted over time from terror to something more complex, a mixture of reverence, fear, and understanding. I've come to realize that my encounter was not merely a brush with danger, but an initiation into a deeper awareness of how thin the line is between the world we perceive and the world as it truly exists. I often recount this story to fellow RV campers, hikers, or anyone willing to listen. I never embellish, never dramatize beyond what I remember. I warn them about the pull of remote lakes, the deceptive stillness, and the way isolation can amplify the faintest sound into a chorus of unease. I tell them about Ranger Salazar's warning, about the importance of paying attention to the subtle cues of the environment, and about listening, not to dominate, but to understand. Those who have spent years in the wilderness nod knowingly, but for most, the lesson is unfamiliar. I emphasize that bravery is not measured in recklessness, but in the courage to respect forces larger than oneself. There was a point, though, when I questioned my own sanity. Months after leaving Crater Lake, I was parked near a small alpine lake in northern Washington. The night was still, perfect, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I heard the same faint chorus, whispering from beneath the water. My pulse quickened, a shiver traced my spine, and I had to remind myself that the mind carries memory with remarkable fidelity and sometimes projects it onto the world around us. I stepped outside, shone my flashlight across the dark water, and of course saw nothing but reflection. Yet the echo of Crater Lake lingered, a lesson that some experiences never truly leave us. The lake had marked me indelibly, and in that marking, it had taught me humility, vigilance, and the fragile, precious nature of solitude. It's strange, the way fear and awe intertwine. I've learned that in moments of profound quiet, the world can feel both terrifying and sacred. Crater Lake's silence is not empty. It is patient, alive with memory and presence. To step into it is to step into something greater than oneself, a living boundary that tests curiosity, humility, and respect. I carry that lesson everywhere I go, in the sound of a still pond, in the hush of a forest at night, in the reflective surfaces that hold more than they reveal. It is a constant reminder that survival is not merely about navigating the physical world, but about navigating perception, emotion, and the subtle, unseen forces that press against the edges of human experience. The final lesson Crater Lake gave me was the understanding of patience. The whispers, the tapping, the pale forms, they did not pursue me. They were not malicious. They were persistent, measured, a demonstration that some presences exist beyond fear and beyond human comprehension. In recognizing them, I also recognized myself, the fragility, the curiosity, the tendency to push boundaries. But I survived because I did not succumb to panic. I endured because I respected the lake's domain and my own limits. That night, the lake and I reached an unspoken accord. I left, alive, altered, and deeply aware of the extraordinary subtlety of nature. Now, whenever I plan a trip, I think carefully about where I go, who I go with, and how I engage with the landscape. The RV remains my constant companion, a small fortress of familiarity against the vast, unpredictable wilderness. I've camped beside rivers that thunder through canyons, across plains where wind carries voices in its own way, and in forests so dense that light barely penetrates. But none of these experiences have carried the same quiet weight, the same intimate tension as the rim of Crater Lake. I carry the memory of those drowned voices not as a curse, but as a guide, a reminder that the world is far stranger, more alive, and more patient than any map, guidebook, or rational mind might suggest. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the RV is still and the forest around me presses close, I close my eyes and let the memory settle. I can almost hear the faint echo of the whispers, faintly coaxing, not threatening, and I am reminded that awe and fear are intertwined. that the unknown is neither to be conquered nor ignored, but acknowledged and respected. I survived Crater Lake not because I was fearless, but because I learned to listen to the silence, to the whispers, to the unseen shapes that drift beneath calm waters. That, in the end, is the real lesson. Survival is not only about enduring the world around us, but about navigating the world within ourselves, recognizing limits and accepting the profound mysteries that exist beyond human understanding. Crater Lake changed me, not just in the way it pushed my fear to its limits, but in the way it expanded my sense of what is possible, what is alive, and what deserves attention. Its drowned voices are not malevolent. They are a mirror, a test, and a guide. I know I will return someday, but only with preparation, respect, and company. Alone, I have learned, is where the lake's lessons become most profound and most dangerous. The echoes may fade over time, but they never disappear entirely. And perhaps that is the point. To remember that silence can be loud, that stillness can teach, and that sometimes the most haunting encounters leave not terror, but wisdom. I end most nights now staring out at the horizon, reflecting on the lessons Crater Lake taught me. Not every silence needs filling. Not every unknown needs conquering. Sometimes endurance, attention, and respect are the highest forms of bravery. I learned that standing on the rim, hearing voices no one else could, witnessing shapes no one else would believe, I had survived, not because I was stronger than the lake, because I was willing to listen, to witness, and to let the awe carry me as much as the fear. That is the gift of Crater Lake, and of all places that dwell on the border between the known and the unimaginable. They teach us, quietly and persistently, how to be alive, how to survive, and how to honor the world in all its strange, beautiful, and terrifying complexity. I didn't choose solitude. It chose me the night I realized silence in the wilderness was never really silent at all. My name's Aaron, I'm 41 years old, and I've spent the better part of my life chasing horizons across the United States in my RV. I thought I knew what solitude meant. I thought I understood what it felt like to be alone under endless skies, where the sound of your own breathing seems louder than the wind in the trees. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered when I parked deep in the Idaho backcountry last fall. I thought the threats I needed to worry about were obvious ones: weather, broken gear, or maybe some curious wildlife. The truth is, the most dangerous threats are the ones you can't see, the ones that creep into your mind before they ever touch your skin. It started with a restlessness that didn't make sense. I'd been driving since early morning, heading west along a 2-lane highway where the forest grew so dense it looked like a wall on either side of me. The sky was pale with the onset of dusk, and every mile carried that strange, expectant hush, like the world was holding its breath. I pulled off at a dirt road that it looked like it might lead to a clearing, and sure enough, after a few bumpy turns, I found a flat patch of earth overlooking a river valley. The view stretched for miles, with pine ridges rolling into the horizon, their tips bruised by the setting sun. It should have felt peaceful. It should have felt like the reason I camp alone in the first place, to breathe, to reset, to listen to the raw quiet of the land. But the quiet didn't feel right. It pressed on me, heavy and deliberate, as though the trees were watching me. I told myself it was nothing, just the fatigue of a long drive. I set up my camp, got the stove going, and watched the steam curl into the cooling air. But as I sat there, every sip of coffee felt too loud. Every scrape of my spoon against the pot echoed like I was in a cavern instead of the open woods. My instincts kept whispering, "You're not supposed to be here." I ignored it, of course. That's what we do out here, isn't it? We rationalize. You hear a branch crack and tell yourself it's a deer. You feel eyes on your back and tell yourself it's just the wilderness reminding you of your smallness. That denial is survival in its own way. It keeps you steady, keeps you from panicking. But it can also keep you from listening when you need to. That night, I tried to sleep. I laid down in the RV, tucked against the valley slope, and told myself I'd be fine. The wind picked up, brushing against the windows, and the whole vehicle shivered like it was holding a breath with me. I remember the sound most of all. It wasn't the usual nighttime rhythm of the wild. No owls, no insects, no coyotes yipping at the moon. Just wind and the occasional distant thud, like something heavy dropped on the forest floor. I woke around 2 in the morning with the distinct sensation that someone had knocked on the side of my RV. Not hard, just once, just enough. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. I lay there in the dark, waiting for it to come again. But there was nothing. Just silence and the pulse of my blood in my ears. I told myself it had to be a branch, maybe a pine cone, anything but what my gut was screaming. At dawn, I stepped outside to check. Nothing around the RV. No fallen branches. No rocks that might have tumbled down. Just my own boot prints circling the gravel patch where I'd parked. The air was sharp with cold, the river far below whispering against the rocks. I tried to shake it off, but the unease clung to me, like damp clothes you can't peel away. Later that morning, while I boiled water for coffee, I noticed something odd about the trees across the clearing. The bark looked stripped in places, long, vertical scars running up the trunks, too neat for bear marks, too deliberate for natural decay. I crouched to get a better look, my breath fogging in front of me. The marks seemed to form patterns, almost like tally lines, dozens of them carved into different trees, all facing toward my campsite. That was the first time I felt true suspicion, the kind that curdles your stomach. I wasn't imagining this. Someone or something had left those marks, and they weren't old either. The wood beneath was pale and fresh, like they'd been made recently. I told myself it was some old logger's trick, maybe boundary markers or just vandalism from bored teenagers. But deep down I knew these woods weren't empty. I should have left right then. Packed up, driven out, followed my instincts. But pride is dangerous out here. I didn't want to admit fear. I didn't want to feel like the wilderness had won, like I wasn't strong enough to face one night alone. That pride is what kept me there another evening, and it's the reason I'll never camp the same way again. The second night, the silence returned thicker than before. It was suffocating, almost oily, seeping through the cracks in the RV. I tried to distract myself, journaled, read by lantern light, but every time I looked up, the windows reflected back only my own anxious face, staring into the dark. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me under because I woke with a start to the sound of footsteps outside. Not an animal, not a deer crashing through brush or a raccoon scuttling. Human footsteps, slow, intentional, crunching on gravel just feet from where my head lay against the RV wall. My throat closed. I didn't move. The steps circled, deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were there. Then, silence. Long, stretched silence. I finally gathered the nerve to peek through the blinds, heart clawing at my chest. Nothing. Just the pale outlines of trees, the clearing bathed in a thin smear of moonlight. But when I glanced down, I saw them. Prints. Footprints in the gravel circling my RV. Bare. No shoes. No boots. Just bare. Human feet pressed into the dirt. That was when dread hit me like a weight, crushing the air from my lungs. Someone was out there, walking barefoot through the night, around my camp, leaving no sound except when they wanted me to hear. I stumbled back from the window, knees weak, and locked every latch I could find. My mind clawed for explanations. Maybe a hiker, maybe some hermit living off-grid, but none of them fit. Not with those stripped trees. Not with the knock. I didn't sleep again. I sat in the driver's seat with the keys in the ignition, every muscle tense, waiting for something, anything to move in the darkness. The forest outside felt alive, not with animals or wind, but with intention, with hunger. The moment the first gray light of dawn slipped between the trees, I slammed the engine into gear and drove. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't care about leaving my coffee mug rolling across the counter. I just wanted distance. The gravel popped under the tires like gunfire, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing there, barefoot and smiling. But as the dirt road stretched out ahead, another kind of fear set in, the realization that I had no idea if leaving would save me. I'd been out here long enough to know the wilderness doesn't work like city streets. Out here, space folds in on itself. Roads curve back to where you started. Maps don't always match the terrain. Fear plays tricks, and the woods are experts at feeding those tricks until you can't separate instinct from paranoia. The dirt road wound down into the valley, shadows still pooling between the pines. I drove for what felt like 20 minutes, maybe more, before something caught my eye, a scarred tree trunk at the bend. I slowed the RV, heart in my throat. The same tallies as before. Fresh cuts, facing the road this time. I stopped dead in the middle of the track, staring at those lines. They weren't just random carvings. They were directional, pointing like arrows. And the longer I looked, the more I realized something that drained the blood from my face. They were marking my path. Someone had been carving those while I was driving. Recently, they wanted me to see them. Panic clawed its way up my spine. I floored the gas, the RV fishtailing as gravel spat from under the tires. I didn't care if I wrecked the suspension. I needed to get out. But the deeper I went, the more the forest thickened, branches knitting overhead like a canopy shutting me in. The road narrowed, sloping steep, until it felt like I was descending into a throat that wanted to swallow me whole. My chest tightened, breath shallow. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to focus on the sound of the engine, the vibration under my feet, anything to tether me to the ordinary, the mechanical, the safe. But then I heard it. A knock. Not from outside this time, from underneath the RV. 3 sharp raps in rhythm echoing through the frame. I swerved, nearly clipped a tree. My mind screamed, "Something's under you. Something's clinging to the chassis." I slammed the brakes, leapt out, gravel crunching under my boots, and dropped to the ground. Nothing. Just the underbelly of the RV dripping with dew, silent and empty. My chest heaved, the air slicing my lungs with every breath. I scanned the trees, expecting movement, expecting to see bare feet slipping between trunks. But the forest just watched, still and merciless. I wanted to keep moving, but part of me hesitated. If I drove any farther, would the road ever end? Or would I just keep circling this valley, deeper into whatever trap had been set? The logical part of my brain, the part that knew maps and compasses and terrain, told me to stop, to regain bearings before I got hopelessly lost. The other part of me, the one raw with terror, screamed to keep driving until asphalt touched my tires again. That split tore at me. Survival depends on decisions made in seconds, and I knew panic could kill me faster than whatever was out here. I forced myself back into the driver's seat, hands trembling, sweat cold on my neck. I drove slower, steady, eyes fixed forward. Then the smell hit me. It seeped into the cabin, damp and sour like rot covered in wet earth. Not the faint smell of decaying leaves, but stronger, invasive, like clinging to my clothes, filling my nostrils until I gagged. I rolled down the windows, but the stench stayed. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the RV. I froze, scanning the cabin. Everything looked normal. The counter cluttered with dishes, blankets piled on the bench seat, my boots kicked off by the door. But the smell grew thicker, suffocating. I dropped to my knees, yanked open the storage compartments, the fridge, the bathroom door. Empty. Still, the odor deepened, like something wet and decomposing was lodged between the walls. I pressed my ear to the paneling. A sound whispered through. Faint. Too faint to be real. Breathing. Slow, shallow breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. I stumbled back, heart hammering, bile in my throat. I wanted to tear the walls apart, rip open the paneling, but terror rooted me in place. I couldn't prove it was real. Maybe I was losing it, maybe sleep deprivation was twisting my senses. But the smell lingered, thick as proof. I couldn't stay in the RV. Not with that. Not with the possibility that something had already gotten inside. I grabbed my pack, shoved in essentials, water, flashlight, my knife, and bolted out the door. My boots hit the gravel, my body moving before my brain caught up. The forest swallowed me in seconds. The road behind me blurred into shadow, and I cut into the trees, desperate to put space between me and that vehicle. But as soon as I entered the timberline, the silence hit harder than before. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just stillness, crushing and unnatural. Every step snapped twigs too loudly. Every breath echoed off the trunks. I told myself to move quietly, to blend, but fear made me clumsy. Branches clawed my arms, tore at my clothes, and the deeper I pushed, the more disoriented I became. The trees pressed close, uniform, repeating as though I was walking through the same space again and again. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement, far off to my right, a figure slipping between the trees. Too fast to identify, but I caught the pale shimmer of skin. Bear. I froze, heart stuttering, knife gripped so tight it shook in my hand. The figure didn't move again, but I knew it had seen me. I could feel its attention like heat against my face. I turned and bolted, not caring where I went, only away. My chest burned, my legs threatened to buckle, but adrenaline carried me. The forest twisted around me, every direction the same, until I stumbled into a clearing. My knees hit the ground, gravel biting into my skin. Gravel. I looked up. My RV stood 30 feet away. My mind fractured. I had run in a straight line. I knew I had, and yet I was back where I started. The RV loomed, its windows dark, its door slightly ajar, though I'd slammed it shut. And from inside, faint but deliberate, came the sound of that same knock. 3 times, rhythmic, patient. The air shattered inside me. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound, and stumbled backward. I didn't care what direction I went anymore. I sprinted into the trees, branches whipping my face, lungs clawing for air. This wasn't survival anymore. This was escape. I didn't stop until my legs gave out, and I collapsed against a fallen log, chest heaving, body trembling so violently my teeth rattled. In that moment, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. 1, something in those woods wanted me there, circling, never leaving. 2, I was already playing by its rules. I sat against that log, chest heaving, the world swaying around me. The forest blurred at the edges of my vision, shadows crawling in the corner of my eyes. I told myself to breathe, to focus, to ground myself in something real. I pressed my palms into the rough bark, felt the splinters bite my skin, and repeated in my head, "This is real. This is real. This is real." But even that felt like a lie. I had no sense of direction anymore. The compass clipped to my pack spun lazily, needle twitching without finding north. I yanked it off and threw it into the brush, fury bubbling up through the terror. My mind screamed at me that I needed to stay rational, but how do you cling to reason when the ground itself feels like it's conspiring to mislead you? The smell returned, that damp, sour rot drifting through the trees like fog. I gagged, clapped a hand over my mouth, but it clung to my skin, my clothes, my hair. It was stronger here, almost unbearable, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I turned in circles, flashlight beams slicing through trunks, but the light only made the shadows deeper. And then I heard it. Not the knock this time, a voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, threading through the stillness. My name. Clear as day. Aaron. Every hair on my body rose. I spun, the flashlight trembling in my hand, but the beam caught nothing, just trees, infinite and watching. The voice came again, this time behind me, softer but closer. Aaron. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just launched forward, instinct taking the reins. My boots pounded the forest floor, my lungs screamed for air, and the voice followed, calling me again and again, always in the same calm tone. No anger, no desperation, just familiarity, like someone who already knew me. But I am alone. I have always been alone on these trips. That's the point. The ground sloped downward, and I nearly lost my footing, sliding through mud until I crashed into a shallow ravine. My knees burned, my palms split open on rock, but I didn't care. I scrambled up the other side, clawing at roots, and hauled myself back onto solid ground. The voice stopped. The silence was worse. My chest hitched, every breath tearing at my throat. I crouched low, knife trembling in my hand, listening for anything. Footsteps, breath, the crack of a branch. Nothing. Just that suffocating quiet, so complete it felt like I had gone deaf. Then, from ahead, a light. It flickered between the trees, faint but warm, like lantern glow. My heart lurched. I staggered toward it, hope sparking against the dread. Maybe it was another camper. Maybe it was a ranger station. Anything human was better than this. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. It wasn't steady, not like fire or a bulb. It pulsed, dimming and brightening, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The trees parted into another clearing, and there it was, an old lantern hanging from a branch, swaying gently though the air was still. I crept closer, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The lantern's glass was fogged, but the flame inside burned clean, untouched by wind or time. My flashlight flickered in my hand, sputtering as though the lantern's glow was choking it out. And below it, carved into the dirt, was a circle. A perfect ring, pressed deep into the soil as if something heavy had traced it again and again. I froze at the edge, bile rising in my throat. In the center of the circle were footprints. Bare, pressed in every direction, overlapping, countless. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and the lantern's flame flared bright, casting shadows across the trees. Those shadows moved wrong, too fast, too sharp. They stretched tall and thin, bending like figures that weren't really there. For a moment, I swore I saw faces in them, hollow eyes, mouths half open as though caught mid-breath. The knife slipped from my hand. My body wanted to collapse, but some primal survival instinct shoved me backwards, step after step, until I broke into a sprint. I didn't care about direction, didn't care if I circled back again. I just needed to outrun that clearing, those shadows, that flame. Branches clawed my arms, ripped my sleeves, and the forest seemed to tighten around me. My legs felt heavy, like the ground itself didn't want to release me. My breaths came ragged, metallic with the taste of blood. And then, without warning, I burst onto the road again. Gravel crunched under my boots. I skidded to a stop, chest heaving, disbelieving. My RV stood 20 yards away, right where I'd left it. Its headlights flicked on, blinding me. The engine coughed to life, though no one sat in the driver's seat. I staggered backward, shaking my head. No, I hadn't touched the keys. I still had them in my pocket. My trembling hand reached down, feeling the cold metal dig into my palm. I looked up again. The RV idled, smoke curling from the exhaust, lights piercing the night, and then the door opened. Slowly, deliberately. The smell rolled out first, damp, rotting, suffocating. My stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. Shadows spilled across the gravel, stretching toward me as though the darkness inside wanted me back. I turned and ran. Not into the trees this time, but down the road, lungs tearing, vision blurring. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My body was a machine of panic, driven only by the need to escape. The voice returned as I ran, echoing through the trees, calm and steady. Aaron. Every time I stumbled, it grew closer. Every time my breath hitched, it whispered again. It wasn't taunting, it wasn't threatening, it was calling me home. Hours passed. At least it felt like hours. The forest thinned, the sky began to pale, and finally, the dirt road broke onto asphalt. My knees buckled at the sight of it. Civilization, the promise of escape. I collapsed onto the pavement, tears burning my eyes. But even there, lying on the edge of that forgotten highway, the silence pressed close. The smell clung to me, soaked into my skin. And when I closed my eyes, I swore I felt the faintest knock. Not outside, not inside, but somewhere deep in my bones, patient and steady. I survived that night, but survival doesn't always mean escape. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was lying there on the pavement, chest burning, body shaking, eyes locked on that empty road stretching into the dawn. The next, I was waking to the sound of tires hissing on asphalt, a horn blaring, someone shouting out a window. A trucker had pulled over, his brake lights glowing red against the morning mist. He climbed down, heavy boots striking the pavement, his face creased with both irritation and concern. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gravely, like he'd been awake since yesterday. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Just a rasp, a hollow cough. My throat felt raw, my body hollowed. I must have looked like I'd crawled out of a grave. The driver helped me up, his hand firm on my shoulder, his eyes narrowing at the cuts on my arms, the dirt caked into my skin, the way I trembled even in the growing light. "What the hell happened to you out here?" he muttered. What could I say? that something followed me, that the woods themselves had wrapped around me like a trap, that my own RV had called me by name, he wouldn't believe it. No one ever does. I forced myself to nod, muttered something about getting lost, about exhaustion, about needing to get back to town. He studied me a long moment like he didn't buy it, but he didn't press. He told me to climb into the cab. I did, sinking into the cracked leather seats, staring out the windshield as the forest blurred by. I should have felt safe. The further we drove, the more the trees thinned, the more the air lost that heavy, suffocating quality. But the smell was still there, faint, clinging, sour. The trucker didn't notice it. He drummed his fingers on the wheel, hummed along with the static of a radio station that barely came through. But I smelled it. It was on me. And worse, I could still feel it. That knock. Not loud, not obvious, but deep, hidden, patient. In the marrow of my bones, in the quiet spaces between my heartbeat. Knock, knock, knock. Like it had taken root in me. When he dropped me at a diner on the edge of a small town, I thanked him. My voice was steadier then, though my hands still shook as I wrapped them around the coffee cup the waitress slid my way. She asked if I'd been camping. I nodded. She said something about how folks always underestimate the wilderness, how it's not just the bears or the storms that get you, it's the things you don't prepare for, the things you can't see coming. I almost laughed at the irony of it, but my throat closed before the sound could leave. For days afterward, I stayed in that town. Slept in a cheap motel room with curtains that smelled faintly of mildew, showered until the hot water ran out, tried to scrub the stench from my skin. Every night, I told myself I'd wake up better, that I'd drive back, reclaim my RV, and prove to myself it was just fear, just exhaustion, just tricks of the mind. But each morning when I opened my eyes, the thought of returning froze me in place. I never went back for the RV. Let it rot out there, let it rust, let the forest take it back. Some things aren't meant to be reclaimed. What I did take back, though, was the lesson. Because survival in the wilderness isn't just about fire kits and water filters and first aid. It's not just about knowing how to patch a tire or fix a leaky roof on your rig. The real survival, the part no one talks about, is facing what creeps inside you when you're alone. The paranoia, the voice thinks you're too proud to trust. I ignored mine. I denied what my gut told me, rationalized every sign until I was nearly trapped in something I still can't explain. I survived by chance, not by preparation. And that haunts me more than anything that happened in those woods. When you camp alone, you have to know this. The unseen threats are the ones that break you. The ones that start quiet, pressing at the edges of your mind. They come as silence too complete, as smells that don't belong, as whispers that sound like someone you love. They twist the familiar until you can't trust your own senses. And the moment you stop trusting yourself, that's when you're already lost. But here's the thing. Survival isn't just about escaping the wilderness. It's about walking back out with something you didn't have before. And I did. I walked out with humility, with respect for instincts I'd buried under pride, with the understanding that strength isn't denying fear, it's knowing when to listen to it. I tell you this not to scare you away from the wild, but to remind you of its power. The wilderness isn't just scenery. It's alive in ways we'll never fully grasp. It's older than us, stronger than us, and sometimes it wants to test us, to see if we can stand alone against it or if we'll break. That night, I nearly broke. I still hear the knock in quiet rooms, still wake to the smell of damp rot that isn't really there. Maybe it will follow me for the rest of my life. Maybe that's the price. But I made it out. And because of that, I can tell you this. If you're going to camp alone, if you're going to take your RV into the forgotten roads and hidden valleys, be ready. Not just with gear, but with yourself. Be ready to trust the unease in your gut. Be ready to leave when something feels wrong, even if pride tells you to stay. Be ready to face the silence, to stare into the dark, to hear your name whispered when no one is there, and to know when it's time to go. Because out there, survival isn't about conquering the wild. It's about coexisting with it, respecting it, and sometimes about walking away before it claims you. I drove away from Idaho with nothing but the clothes on my back and the echoes of that night lodged in me. And even now, when I park beneath wide skies in safer places, when I light a fire and listen to the crackle, I remind myself of the truth that saved me. The greatest threats are the unseen ones, the ones that slip past your eyes and nest in your mind, the ones you can't fight with a knife or outrun on a dirt road. If you can survive those, you can survive anything, and I intend to. The first time I parked my old faded Volkswagen Vanagon at Bitterroot Forest, I didn't know the forest had a way of waiting. You could feel it the moment you crossed the last strip of asphalt, past the tiny, worn sign that warned of wildlife, that recommended caution, that nobody ever read. I had always loved the idea of escaping, of folding into a place where the world's chaos didn't follow me. But that day, as I swung open the sliding door of the van, something in the air told me it wasn't the escape I imagined. The wind carried a damp chill that seemed heavier than normal, brushing through the pine needles like an unseen hand and stirring a smell of wet earth and something older, something rotting that didn't belong to nature alone. I was traveling with two friends, Mara and Tim. Mara had a laugh that could light up a whole campground, bright and reckless, as if fear didn't exist in her universe. Tim, quieter, always carrying a notebook and pen, as if the act of recording kept him grounded when the world felt too large. I had driven us hours from the nearest town, through winding roads that narrowed into dirt trails, until the Vanagon's tires sunk slightly into mud and gravel at the edge of a secluded clearing. The sun was just a fading smear on the horizon, and the first night had begun. We set up camp mechanically, almost ritualistically. Folding chairs, a small fire pit, the smell of lighter fluid burning faintly in the air. I remember feeling a strange mix of pride and unease as I backed the van against the trees, thinking it would give us cover. But even as we joked about ghost stories and wolves, a shadow lingered beyond the firelight. The trees, I realized too late, were oddly spaced, their branches long and spindly, forming angles that looked almost deliberate. I brushed it off as imagination, the kind that comes with isolation. Night fell fast, faster than I was ready for. We ate from a cooler, laughing at our half-cooked sausages, the sound of our voices sharp in the dense quiet. But then the forest responded. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural howl rolled across the hills, not like the wolves I'd heard in documentaries, but more human, elongated in a way that made your chest tighten. Mara froze mid-laugh, as if she too realized the sound didn't belong to the ordinary. Tim, notebook forgotten, just stared into the darkness, his jaw tight. We decided to sleep early, pushing off the eerie tension as just nerves, the kind that comes from being too far from civilization. I climbed into the van, the familiar scent of old vinyl seats and faint engine oil wrapping around me like comfort. But comfort was short-lived. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a scratching sound, low and irregular, like claws scraping the van's roof. I sat up, heart hammering, pressing my hands to the metal above me. The sound stopped, then a pause, then another, slower, deliberate. My breath hitched. Mara's light snore from the other side of the van was suddenly terrifying in its calmness. I wanted to convince myself it was a raccoon, a tree branch brushing against the metal, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Slowly I unlatched the sliding door, peeking outside. Moonlight streaked through the trees, illuminating patches of forest floor, but nothing moved. Only the smell, foul, tangy, almost iron-like, permeated the night. I shook my head and retreated back inside, trying to rationalize. The next morning, we joked again about the noises, though Mara's laughter carried a nervous edge. We went on a short hike, mapping out the small trails around the clearing. It was then I noticed the prints. Not just paw prints, but larger, human-sized prints that overlapped the wolf tracks. Their gait was off, uneven, as if whoever, or whatever, made them was struggling with balance, or maybe playing a game I didn't understand. Tim knelt, sketching in his notebook. "These aren't ordinary," he muttered. I wanted to shrug it off, to keep the trip cheerful, but unease gnawed at the edges of my mind. That night, the forest grew louder. The wind carried voices, or something that sounded like voices, low and rhythmic, almost chanting. Our fire flickered violently, shadows stretching unnaturally across the van and nearby trees. The Vanagon, normally a refuge, felt exposed, a small, vulnerable capsule in the vast, waiting darkness. And then I saw them. Pairs of yellow eyes glinting in the shadows, not directly at us at first, but observing. We didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. The scratching returned, this time on the sides of the van, circling, moving in patterns that made my stomach knot. Mara whispered, "They're here." And for the first time, I felt true fear. Not the adrenaline thrill you chase on camping trips, but the paralyzing, bone-deep fear of being watched by something beyond comprehension. We didn't sleep again that night. Tim tried to document the sounds, the movement, but the recorder picked up nothing, only the distorted wind. Mara kept whispering that we needed to leave, but the van's engine refused to turn over, as if the forest itself had seized it. Hours dragged, each second stretching into a minute, each minute a small eternity. By dawn, the yellow eyes had gone, but their absence was worse than their presence. We packed quickly, almost in a trance, my hands trembling as I wrestled with the stubborn engine. When it finally roared to life, I drove without looking back, windows down, inhaling the crisp morning air, trying to convince myself it was over. But the forest had marked us. The echo of those howls followed us down the winding road, fading but persistent, a reminder that the Bitterroot was patient and watchful, that it waited for travelers who ignored its quiet warnings. Even now, I can smell that rotting, iron-like tang when I close my eyes, and the memory of those glowing eyes returns like a pulse in my chest. That trip taught me that fear isn't just in the moment, it's in the anticipation, the lingering shadow of what you cannot explain. I learned to listen, not just to the wind and the trees, but to my own instincts. And sometimes I wonder if the forest even needs wolves. Perhaps it has other hunters, patient, quiet, and watching, waiting for the next camper who dares to park a Volkswagen at the edge of its clearing. The road back didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a retreat from a place that had already claimed part of us. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those yellow eyes, or something worse, staring from the trees as we passed. Mara sat beside me, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly out the window, as if she was trying to will herself somewhere else, anywhere but that forest. Tim was silent, scribbling furiously in his notebook, his pen moving almost frantically, as if capturing the events could keep them from following us. But the forest didn't release us. Even miles from the clearing, I could still hear it. Not the wolves, not even the scratching, but the subtle noises layered under the wind. A shuffle of leaves, a distant snap of a twig, a murmur that sounded almost like someone speaking in the underbrush. Every so often, I thought I caught a silhouette at the tree line, just standing, unmoving, watching us retreat. I told myself it was paranoia, that the mind played tricks after a night of terror. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't the forest playing tricks. It was patient, alive, and aware. When we reached the small town nearest to Bitterroot, the normalcy of the shops and the streetlights was almost unbearable. It felt wrong, almost insulting, to see life continuing as if nothing had happened. But even here, in the artificial comfort of neon signs and paved streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Our shadows seemed heavier, stretching unnaturally, merging and splitting like the branches we had fled. Mara kept glancing over her shoulder, eyes wide, murmuring things like, "They're still there. I can feel them." I wanted to believe she was imagining it, but every instinct screamed that she wasn't. We booked a motel for the night, thinking that walls, locks, and city lights could offer safety. I parked the Vanagon as close to the door as possible, practically hugging it to the building, as if proximity could somehow protect it, and us from the forest. Tim unpacked his camera and recorder, attempting to capture every sound, every shadow, as though documentation could provide proof to the rational world. Mara wouldn't sleep. She paced, speaking softly to herself, tracing invisible patterns in the room as though trying to map some unseen geography. Around midnight, the first knock came. I didn't hear it at first, my mind too exhausted to register subtle shifts in reality. Then, another, more deliberate, against the metal side of the Vanagon. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I froze. Mara was already awake, staring at the door, her breath quick, shallow. Tim grabbed the flashlight, the beam cutting across the room, bouncing off walls onto the van, but nothing moved. The knocking stopped. We waited. Minutes, hours, I don't know. Sleep didn't come. Then came the whispering. Soft at first, almost indecipherable, a murmur at the edge of perception. I could hear syllables, words maybe, but they twisted in the darkness, impossible to understand fully. Mara's hands trembled as she covered her ears. Tim aimed the camera toward the van, shouting, "Stop! Stop! Just stop!" But nothing in the recording captured what we heard. The whispers persisted, bending around the corners of the room, outside the windows, brushing over us like invisible fingers. By morning, exhaustion had replaced terror with something more dangerous, numb awareness. We could no longer tell if we were safe or if we had been followed all night. Mara wouldn't eat. Tim refused to leave the van. I felt trapped in my own body, a prisoner of memory, of something I couldn't unsee, couldn't forget. The Vanagon, our companion and shelter, now felt like a fragile shell, vulnerable to things that could bend reality, or at least bend perception, until sanity wavered. We decided against every instinct to return to the forest. Rational thought told us that facing it, confronting what we had seen, might help us understand it, or at least reclaim some measure of control. We drove slowly, hearts hammering, windows up, headlights cutting through the mist that clung to the trees like a living thing. The clearing looked different this time. Smaller, somehow. The shadows stretched longer, darker, almost as if the forest had shifted in our absence. The Vanagon's tires crunched over the familiar gravel, but we barely noticed. Our focus was on the clearing, on the patterns of the trees, on the silence that had replaced the noises of the night before. That silence was worse. It carried expectation, a promise that the forest was aware of our return. Mara whispered that she could feel eyes on her, and I realized I could too. I could feel the pressure of unseen things, the weight of attention, like the forest itself was a sentient predator, judging us for trespassing. It started with movement at the edges of the clearing. Shadow-like forms, longer than normal, too straight to be natural, gliding just beyond the trees. Then more shapes emerged, slowly, deliberately. Eyes glinted, yellow and unblinking, reflecting the van's headlights. Wolves, or something resembling wolves, moved with a coordination that suggested intelligence, a pack aware of its prey. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and hollow. Mara screamed before I even had time to react. One of the creatures had stepped into the light, unnaturally large, its fur matted, eyes glinting with something beyond hunger, calculation. We tried to start the engine, but it stalled, coughing as if it too felt the forest's grip. Tim pounded the dashboard in desperation, shouting at the Vanagon to move. The creatures circled closer, patient, deliberate, their low growls vibrating through the ground and into our bones. Panic overtook reason. I kicked the ignition with every ounce of strength left in me. The engine roared. The tires spun on the loose gravel, and we shot forward, tires flinging stones into the dark. Behind us, the creatures didn't give chase in the ordinary sense. Instead, they melted back into the shadows, as if the forest itself swallowed them, leaving only the echo of their presence. Mara cried softly, and Tim refused to speak, staring straight ahead with hollow eyes. I drove until the sun rose, until the forest was just a memory behind us, though I knew it would linger in every sense, every shadow, every chill in the wind. Even now, years later, I can't drive past a patch of pine without feeling that weight in my chest. The Vanagon sits in my garage, idle, yet I can swear sometimes I hear scratching at its side or a whisper from the shadowy corners of the cabin. Bitterroot Forest didn't just scare us. it marked us. It taught us that fear isn't always immediate. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it follows. And sometimes the only thing you can do is acknowledge it, respect it, and remember that survival isn't about fighting. It's about listening, observing, and knowing when to leave. The weeks after Bitterroot were strangely quiet, too quiet. It's as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis while we were gone, leaving a residue of unease that clung to every mundane sound. I tried to return to normal life, work, friends, errands, but every rustle of leaves outside my apartment window, every howl in the distance, brought me back to that clearing. Mara was worse. She refused to talk about it, refused to even look at the Vanagon, which sat silently in my garage as though it, too, remembered the forest's patience. Tim retreated further into his notebooks, obsessively recording every detail of our trip, every sound we remembered, every footprint we had seen. None of it explained the feeling that followed us. The sense that we had left something unfinished, that the forest hadn't quite let us go. One evening, I couldn't resist. I drove the Vanagon out of the garage and onto the familiar dirt roads that led toward Bitterroot, despite every instinct screaming at me to stop. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air crisp, biting at my skin as I drove further from civilization. I told myself I was just checking, just confronting the past to prove that it was over. But as the trees thickened, as the shadows deepened, and the wind whispered in patterns that felt deliberate, I realized that the past wasn't just behind me, it was alive, waiting. The clearing looked unchanged from the distance, but something felt off, too still. No birds, no rustle of small animals, no wind stirring the canopy. Even the smell was absent, the damp earth and rot replaced by a sterile silence that pressed against my ears. I parked the Vanagon at the edge and stepped out, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the thrum of adrenaline in my chest. I could almost see them in the trees, the wolves, or whatever they truly were, waiting, patient, intelligent. And I felt it. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. The forest remembered us, and so did they. A low growl rumbled behind me. I spun toward the sound and froze. One of the creatures stepped into the clearing, massive, fur-bristling, eyes glinting in the dim light. My breath caught, my mind a tangled mess of terror and disbelief. I had to remind myself, we survived before. I survived before. This was a test of observation, of patience, of listening. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hands, trying not to provoke, not to move too quickly. It circled, slow, deliberate, almost contemplative. Its eyes bore into mine, and I felt something strange, an understanding, or perhaps a warning. I could hear the rustle of the underbrush as more emerged, a silent, shadowy pack forming at the edges of my vision. My instincts screamed at me to run, to slam the Vanagon's doors, to leave forever. But something deeper whispered respect, awareness, recognition. This wasn't just a threat, it was a lesson, encoded in the movements of predator and forest alike. Hours passed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loudly. I watched, and slowly the pack began to recede, melting back into the shadowed trees. The growls faded, replaced by the whispering wind and the distant cry of a bird. I didn't understand why they had let me stay, why they had allowed me to witness them again. Perhaps it was the same patience I had sensed before, the quiet measure of the forest itself. Or perhaps it was mercy, or a test. I felt a shift inside myself, a trembling awareness that survival wasn't always about force or cunning. Sometimes it was about humility, about noticing the world not as an obstacle, but as a living, breathing entity. When I finally turned back to the Vanagon, I felt an odd sense of peace. Mara and Tim would never understand it, probably never believe it. But in that moment, I realized that the forest, the wolves, even the fear itself had been trying to teach us something. Not just about caution or danger, but about listening to instincts, respecting boundaries, acknowledging that there are forces in the world, natural, primal, intelligent, that exist beyond our comprehension. I drove back slowly, letting the road carry me out of the forest shadow. The Vanagon hummed beneath me, reliable, alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. I glanced at the rearview mirror once, catching a glimpse of sunlight breaking through the trees, glinting in a way that reminded me of those yellow eyes. Not threatening, not hunting, just watching, aware. And for the first time since that night, I didn't feel fear. I felt connected. I felt seen. I felt small but alive. Back in town, Mara and Tim were waiting, their expressions mixed: relief, worry, disbelief. I told them little. Some things I realized can't be explained. Some lessons, some fears are meant to be carried alone, in silence, in reflection. And yet sharing it didn't feel necessary. The experience had marked us, changed us, and left a quiet wisdom behind that would guide every camping trip, every venture into the wilderness, every encounter with the unknown. Now, years later, I still drive the Vanagon to remote campgrounds, always with respect, always alert, always listening. The Bitterroot Forest taught me that fear is a teacher, patience is a guide, and survival is a blend of courage and humility. And every time I see those shadowed trees, I remember that night, the eyes in the dark, and the way silence can be louder than any howl. We live in a world that tempts us to test limits, to push boundaries, to believe we are masters of the wilderness. But the forest, the animals, the hidden presences, whatever they are, remind us otherwise. They teach us that awe and fear are intertwined, that the smallest misstep can draw attention, and that true safety comes not from domination, but from awareness, patience, and respect. Every Volkswagen trip I take now carries that lesson. I check the perimeters, I note every sound, I pay attention to instincts I might have dismissed in the past. I share the story, not to scare, but to awaken. To remind fellow campers that the world beyond the asphalt is alive, watching, and patient. That the unknown isn't always malevolent, but it demands attention. That fear isn't a curse, it's a guide. Sometimes when I camp in the quiet hours of the night, I hear faint rustling outside the van, a whisper of movement just beyond the firelight. My heart quickens, not in panic, but in recognition, and I smile because I know I am not alone. The forest watches, the wolves remember, and in that acknowledgement there is a strange, comforting power. Fear taught me to listen, to respect, and to survive. And perhaps if I'm careful, I will continue to do so, one Volkswagen trip at a time. Years have passed since that first night at Bitterroot, yet the forest never really left me. I still drive the Vanagon through winding back roads, seeking quiet clearings and shaded campgrounds, chasing the peace that only the wilderness can provide, but always aware, always listening. The memory of those glowing eyes, of the low growls that vibrated through the soil, remains with me like a pulse beneath my skin. It's not terror anymore. It's caution, a humbling awareness that the world is far older, far wiser, and far more patient than any human could ever hope to be. I've learned to recognize the subtle signs: a tree bent oddly, a pattern of broken twigs, the faintest whispering in the wind that doesn't belong to any animal I know. It's easy to dismiss, to rationalize, but Bitterroot taught me that ignoring these signs is reckless. Fear isn't an enemy, it's a compass. That night, Mara and Tim didn't fully understand it, and maybe they never will. But I do. I feel it in my bones, in the quiet moments before the sun rises, when the world is still, when the forest breathes around me, and the Vanagon sits silently beside me, a faithful witness to both my fear and my resilience. There are nights when I camp alone, pulling the Vanagon into a secluded clearing far from other humans. The fire crackles, the smell of pine and damp earth fills my senses, and I hear the faintest rustle beyond the firelight. My pulse quickens, but now it's not panic. It's respect. I know the forest is alive. I know it notices me, studies me, judges my movements. And I sit quietly, breathing, listening, learning once more. I've realized that survival isn't just about fleeing danger. It's about understanding it, moving within it without arrogance, without presumption. Mara eventually returned to camping, but with caution I didn't recognize before. Tim poured himself into studies of wildlife, tracking, documenting, never underestimating the intelligence of the creatures he once thought were simple predators. And me? I drive my Vanagon with a reverence that borders on ritual. Every hinge, every tire, every creak in the frame reminds me of the lessons Bitterroot taught. Patience, observation, humility. The forest doesn't forgive recklessness. The wolves, whatever they were, don't hunt randomly. They teach, they test, they mark those who wander too carelessly. Sometimes I think about the campers who arrive unprepared, the people who believe that nature is theirs to conquer, that the silence is empty, the shadows harmless. I want to warn them, to tell them that the forest waits and watches, that fear is a guide they should heed. But I know the lesson must be earned. Some knowledge, some respect cannot be handed over. It must be discovered in the quiet tension of a clearing at night, in the gaze of eyes that gleam yellow in the darkness, in the hum of wind through the pines that carries something older than human memory. I park the Vanagon now, not just as a vehicle, but as a marker of experience, a symbol of passage through fear. Every trip begins with a ritual, a survey of the perimeter, a scan of the tree line, a quiet acknowledgement of whatever may be watching. I light a small fire, but never too large, never too bright. I listen to the forest before I speak, moving only with deliberate intention, aware that in the stillness it observes. And I remember the first night, the low scratching on the roof, the whispering voices that never appeared on Tim's recorder. I remember the weight of those glowing eyes, the patience of the wolves, and the forest's unspoken lesson. Humility is survival, and respect is power. There is a strange comfort in this knowledge. Fear no longer paralyzes me. It sharpens me. It allows me to navigate the wilderness, to experience the unknown without underestimating it. It allows me to sit by my small fire, the Vanagon at my side, knowing that the world is alive, intelligent, and far larger than my imagination could ever contain. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a flicker of movement at the tree line, a shadow, a pair of yellow eyes watching silently. And I smile. Not because the danger is gone, but because I have learned to move within it, to honor it, and to emerge each time with awareness intact. The Bitterroot Forest will always be a part of me. Its shadows, its patience, its whispers, they echo through every camping trip, every quiet dawn, every stretch of road beneath the tires of the Vanagon. And in that echo, I carry a lesson that extends beyond fear, beyond survival. The world is vast, the unknown is patient, and the mind that listens carefully, the heart that respects, will find not just safety, but understanding. So, when I park at a secluded clearing, open the sliding door, and step into the cool embrace of the forest, I do so with gratitude. For the fear I felt, for the lessons learned, for the knowledge that I am small but awake, aware but humble. The Vanagon is my vessel, the forest my teacher, and every trip is a dialogue with a world that does not rush, does not yield, and never forgets. I drive away only when I feel the balance shift, when the shadows no longer press close, when the whispers retreat to the distance, and even then I know that the forest is patient. It waits, it watches, and the wolves, if they are truly wolves, are patient too. They remember. In the quiet moments when the Vanagon hums along the road, I reflect on those nights of panic, of suspense, of fear, so sharp it carved itself into my memory. I realize now that fear is not something to be escaped, it is something to be understood. The forest, the shadows, the glowing eyes, they are guides, silent instructors in the art of respect, observation, and humility. And the lessons endure, long after the rustle of leaves, long after the first howls, long after the fire burns down to embers. So I continue to drive, continue to camp, continue to listen. The world outside is alive. The shadows remember. And I, in my small Volkswagen Vanagon, carry the wisdom of Bitterroot Forest wherever I go, that the unknown is not an enemy, but a teacher, that fear is not a weakness, but a guide, and that survival, true survival, comes from respect, attention, and the courage to face what you cannot fully understand. And in that understanding, I find peace. The night I first stumbled into that part of the forest, I knew something was wrong before I saw a single thing. The silence was too thick, too absolute, like the world had decided to hold its breath all at once. I'm Thomas, 52 years old, and I've been a park ranger most of my adult life. I've worked in places people dream about visiting. High ridges where clouds move beneath your boots, river valleys so quiet you can hear the shift of gravel under elk hooves from a mile off. But the place I'm about to tell you about was nothing like that. This was in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, near an old service road that doesn't even appear on most maps anymore. And what I found there changed the way I look at campsites, the way I think about being alone in the woods, maybe even the way I think about the wilderness itself. I was sent up that direction after a string of complaints. Campers reporting odd noises, a feeling of being watched. One couple even abandoning their gear in the middle of the night and hiking out without checking in at the station. We usually chalk that up to inexperience or panic, but when gear is left behind, we treat it as an emergency. So I packed up and drove my truck as far as the dirt road would allow, then hiked in with my pack and lantern. The forest was dense, the trees tall enough to blot out most of the late afternoon light, and the air smelled damp, a touch of mold, as if the soil had been turned over again and again by unseen hands. When I came upon the first campsite, it looked like someone had simply stood up in the middle of dinner and walked away. Plates half filled with beans and sausage were still resting by the fire pit. A tent had been left open, a sleeping bag inside pulled halfway down as if someone had crawled out in a hurry. What chilled me wasn't the gear itself, but the way the site felt abandoned mid-breath. No footprints leading away, no trash scattered as animals would have done. It was all intact. Too intact. I crouched by the fire pit. The coals were long cold, gray ash settled like sifted flour. That told me at least a day had passed, maybe more. I called out, half hoping for someone to step out of the brush, embarrassed, ready to explain. Nothing. The trees pressed back with silence. The longer I stood there, the more I realized what I didn't hear. No jays squawking, no chipmunks rustling, not even the low drone of mosquitoes. Just my breath and the faint creak of branches shifting overhead. I told myself to move on, to check the surrounding area. About 100 yards down the slope, I found another site. This one was worse. 3 tents, all collapsed as if someone had cut the lines in the night. Camping chairs overturned, a cooler cracked open but not by claws, more like it had been stomped. Inside, cans floated in a sour pool of melted ice water, labels peeling, and again, no sign of where the campers had gone. No backpacks taken, no shoes missing. Everything remained. Everything except the people. By then, my unease had shifted into suspicion. I thought of mountain lions, maybe a bear, though even then it didn't sit right. Predators leave signs. Blood, drag marks, claw rakes on bark. These sites were untouched in that way, preserved as if waiting for their owners to return. I knelt and studied the ground. The soil was damp but firm, my own boot prints pressed clear into the mud. Yet around the site, nothing. No trails leading off, no sudden rush of imprints as if people had scattered in fear. Just the site, frozen in time. The deeper I went, the more sites I found. Some were barely disturbed at all, a chair tipped over, a kettle hanging above a long, dead fire. Others looked as if people had tried to pack hastily, bags half-zipped, belongings scattered like they'd been dropped mid-flight. I counted 6 in total before dusk began to swallow the light. Each one silent, each one empty, and not a single track leading away. It was as though the forest had opened its throat and swallowed them whole, without struggle, without sound. That night I decided to camp near the first site I'd found. My training told me to mark the area and hike back, but something inside me resisted. Maybe it was pride, maybe duty, maybe just the stubbornness of a man who spent decades telling others they have nothing to fear in the woods. I built a fire, laid out my bedroll, and sat there with my back straight, listening. I told myself I'd find the explanation by staying, that the darkness would reveal what the daylight concealed. But when the fire had burned low and the shadows grew long, the noises began. At first, just small things, branches cracking where no weight should have been, a low shuffle in the brush that never moved closer. I tightened my grip on the lantern, sweeping the light across the tree trunks. The forest was still, nothing but bark and moss and the occasional glint of spider eyes. Then the sound changed. It became rhythmic, a soft tap, 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 like knuckles knocking against hollow wood. The knocking didn't stay in one place. It moved, from tree to tree, circling, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if testing me, measuring how long it would take for me to flinch. I stood, every muscle braced, and called out, loud, firm, the way we're taught, "Park Ranger! If you're out there, show yourself." My voice carried into the dark, and for a moment the tapping stopped. Relief started to trickle in, but then, from somewhere farther back in the trees, a new sound rose. A voice. Low, almost a whisper, but clear enough to make the hairs on my arms stand. It said my name, Thomas. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't an echo of my own call. It was deliberate, careful, almost coaxing. I spun, light cutting through the branches, searching for any shape, any sign of movement. Nothing, just the forest swallowing the sound. I wanted to leave then, to pack up and run for the truck, but something inside me froze. The voice hadn't sounded threatening. It had sounded familiar, like someone I knew well, though I couldn't place it. That was worse. It hooked into my chest and rooted me where I stood. And then came the smell. At first faint, damp soil, rot, the copper tang of blood carried faintly on the breeze. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, but the stink grew stronger until it coated my tongue. I swept the light again, and that's when I saw it. Hanging from the lowest branch of a pine, a strip of fabric, torn nylon, the same shade of green as one of the abandoned tents. I didn't climb to reach it. I didn't have to, because beneath the tree, half sunk into the mud, I saw the print of a bare foot. Not large, not small. Human. Fresh. And pointing toward the campsite, not away from it. I stood there in that circle of firelight, heart thundering against my ribs, and realized the truth I hadn't wanted to face. No one had left these camps behind. They had been taken. I didn't sleep that night. I sat rigid in my chair, the lantern hissing faintly at my side, fire reduced to embers, every nerve inside me stretched tight as wire. My body screamed for rest, but my mind wouldn't allow it. Every time my eyelids began to sag, I'd hear it again, the faint tap, 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 like knuckles searching for a hollow place in the wood. Sometimes it came from the right, sometimes from behind me. Each time I swung the lantern toward it, the noise would vanish, leaving only the dense silence of the forest pressing down on me like a weight. By dawn, I was raw, my throat dry, my thoughts jumbled from lack of rest. The morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden, and in some ways that was worse. Around my campsite, in the damp soil, were fresh prints, bare feet, some small, some larger, circling where I had sat all night. Dozens of them. And not one print led away. They ended abruptly, mid-stride, as if the ground itself had consumed them. I felt a rising panic then, a knot tightening in my chest. But I reminded myself I'm a ranger. My job is to investigate, not to run. Still, I couldn't shake the image of those campsites, 6 of them in total, all left behind in varying degrees of haste, each of them swallowed by this same silent presence. Whatever was happening here wasn't just paranoia, and it wasn't just panic. People had vanished. I packed my things quickly and began moving deeper along the ridge. If there was an answer, it would be deeper, where fewer had dared to tread. The forest grew thicker as I descended, pines giving way to stands of spruce and fir, their branches heavy, the air cloying and damp. I kept hearing that faint tapping, sometimes distant, sometimes so close I could swear it came from just behind the next trunk. It had become the rhythm of the place, a language the forest spoke. Halfway down the slope, I found another site. This one was unlike the others. The tent had been cut, not torn by claws, not slashed at random, but cut with something sharp, deliberate. Inside, everything was gone. No sleeping bags, no clothes, no food, just the hollow shell of the nylon sagging into itself. That, more than anything else, unsettled me, because it suggested intent. Someone or something had returned to this site after the campers had vanished. The smell hit me again, stronger this time, metallic, wet, the unmistakable tang of old blood. My stomach turned, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. I followed it, step by cautious step, until I reached a small clearing where the trees opened enough to let the gray daylight spill through. There I found the fire. not a campfire, not arranged with care or stones. This was a heap of charred wood, piled high, and around it, arranged in a circle, were objects. Camping gear, pots, pans, lanterns, boots, each placed deliberately, evenly spaced. And in the middle of the fire, half burned but still visible, was a map. I pulled it free with a stick. The paper crumbled at the edges, but the markings were clear enough. It was the very section of the San Juans where I now stood. But drawn across it, in heavy black lines, was a spiral. Not a trail, not a ridge line. A spiral that began in the heart of this valley and tightened inward again and again until it ended in a single point where I now stood. I dropped the stick and staggered back, my pulse pounding in my ears. That was when I heard the voice again. Thomas. Not whispered this time. Spoken. Firm. A voice I almost recognized, though I couldn't place it. It came from the trees beyond the clearing, from the heavy dark where the light couldn't reach. I turned in a slow circle, lantern raised, but nothing moved. Then, just at the edge of my sight, something shifted. Not a person, not an animal, something between the two. A shape bent wrong, shoulders too broad, arms too long, crouched against the trunk of a tree. When the lantern beam caught it, it moved, sliding backward into the dark without sound. I should have run then. I should have turned and retraced my steps back to the truck, but I didn't. Because in that moment, something more terrifying struck me. The voice, it hadn't been calling from the trees. It had been calling from inside my head, clear, sharp, familiar, as if I had heard it in dreams I could never remember. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my temples, the forest spinning around me. When I opened my eyes again, the spiral was still there on the map in my mind, tightening inward, dragging me toward its center. I forced myself to stand, stumbling backward, heart thundering. I shoved the burned map into my pack and turned for the ridge. I needed to get out, needed to report this, needed to put distance between myself and whatever intelligence was pulling those strings. But the path I had taken down no longer looked the same. The trail was gone, swallowed by trees that seemed denser now, closer, pressing in around me. As I pushed through, I realized something even worse. I wasn't hearing the tapping anymore. I was hearing footsteps. Deliberate. Soft. Matching my pace, and sometimes stepping just after I did, like a shadow learning how to walk. By the time dusk came again, I had lost the trail entirely. My legs burned, lungs ached, sweat stung my eyes, but no matter how far I pushed, the landscape only seemed to shift and curl around me. I should have been miles from where I started, but when I finally stumbled into a clearing, I froze. Because it was the first campsite again, the same plates by the fire pit, the same unzipped tent, the same eerie stillness. Only this time, something was different. On the log beside the fire pit sat a lantern. My lantern. Still hissing, still burning with the faint hiss of gas. But I had it in my hand, and when I looked down, the one I carried wasn't lit. I froze in that clearing, the two lanterns throwing my mind into a spiral of confusion. The one in my hand was dead, its glass blackened and cold, yet I could feel its weight, the familiar ridges of its handle pressed into my palm. The one on the log burned bright, steady, a mirror of the very object I carried. I stepped closer, and the firelight caught on the glass, reflecting a figure just beyond my shoulder, my own outline, but not quite. Taller, shoulders hunched, head bent slightly forward as though watching me with a patience that chilled my blood. I spun around, swinging the lantern like a weapon, but nothing was there, just the ring of trees, their bark slick and wet with the condensation of nightfall. The air pressed heavy, smelling of rust and damp soil. I wanted to believe fatigue was playing tricks on me, that my sleepless night and long day had warped my senses, but the second lantern hissed steadily, undeniable, mocking me with its flame. I forced myself to move, to pick it up, to feel its warmth against my skin. My hand shook as I touched the glass, and when I finally gripped the handle, a jolt ran through me. Not electrical, not painful, but something deeper, a recognition, like the tightening of muscle when a memory tries to surface. For a split second, I saw flashes, tents collapsing in silence, Campers standing at the edge of the trees with empty expressions, a spiral drawn again and again in the dirt until fingers bled. I dropped the lantern. It clattered against the rocks, flames sputtering but refusing to die. That was when I noticed something I hadn't before, carved into the bark of the nearest tree, so faint it almost blended with the natural grooves. Words. We are still here. The letters were jagged, rushed, clawed into the wood by hands desperate to leave a mark. I traced them with my finger, and my breath caught. The wood was fresh, sap still damp at the edges. Whoever had written it had done so recently, maybe hours before. Behind me, the forest groaned. Not the wind, not a branch breaking. This was deeper, a resonance that shook the ground beneath my boots, as though something vast had stirred in the earth below. The spiral burned in my mind again, tightening, pulling. I staggered back, clutching my temples, and heard the footsteps. Closer now, many of them, moving in rhythm. I shouted into the night, my voice breaking, "Who's there? Show yourself!" For a moment, silence. Then, from the tree line, shadows emerged. At first, I thought they were people, the missing campers, maybe, but as they stepped into the dim light of the lanterns, my stomach dropped. Their faces were wrong. Not mutilated, not grotesque, just empty. Eyes dull, expressions slack, like puppets waiting for a hand to guide them. Their clothes were torn in places, dirt clinging to their skin, but they didn't stumble or sway. They moved with unsettling grace, each step precise, synchronized. I stumbled back until my shoulders pressed against the tent I'd examined the day before. The figures stopped a few yards away, standing in a half circle, watching me with those vacant eyes. My heart hammered, but some stubborn part of me, some instinct born of years in the wilderness, made me stand tall. I forced steel into my voice. I'm a ranger. If you need help, speak. If you're injured, I'll take you out of here. Nothing. No flicker of recognition. Only the sound of the forest and the faint hiss of the burning lantern. Then, in unison, they lifted their right hands, palms outward, a silent, eerie greeting or warning, and then they spoke. Not one by one, not staggered. Together. The same voice, layered over itself, spilling from every mouth in perfect unison. Thomas. The sound shattered me. It was my mother's voice. She'd been gone 20 years, but the tone was exact. The softness, the weight, the unshakable familiarity. My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed. That voice wrapped around me like chains. Thomas, they repeated, each syllable striking like a hammer on iron. I tried to shut it out, to remind myself this was impossible, but then another sound joined, a low hum vibrating in my bones, rising from the earth itself. The spiral. It was no longer just in my head. It was here, beneath my feet, pulling me inward. I tore my eyes away from them, from their raised palms and hollow faces, and saw it, etched into the soil of the clearing, faint but unmistakable. A spiral, not drawn by human hands, not with sticks or stones. Burned. The earth itself seared black, curling tighter and tighter to a center that lay just beneath my boots. The hum grew louder. The figures stepped closer. I stumbled back, tripping over the fire pit, catching myself on my hands. My palms burned against the hot ash, but the pain grounded me. I scrambled up, heart hammering, and made a desperate choice. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots caught at my ankles, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard them, those footsteps, steady, tireless, keeping pace no matter how fast I pushed forward. The hum followed too, growing, swelling, a sound that didn't just fill the forest but filled me, vibrating in my teeth, in my chest, until I thought it might shake me apart. I don't remember how long I ran. Time had no meaning in that place. But eventually, my legs gave out and I collapsed against a fallen log, chest heaving, vision blurred with sweat and tears. For a long time I lay there, listening. No footsteps, no hum, just my own ragged breathing. When I finally lifted my head, I realized I wasn't where I thought I was. I wasn't miles from the campsites. I wasn't even far from the clearing. I was back at it. The spiral burned faintly in the dirt, the lantern still hissing on the log, the empty-eyed figures gone as though they'd never been. But the words on the tree had changed. This time, carved deeper, sap bleeding down the trunk. You are still here. The words on the tree stopped my breath cold. You are still here. My knees weakened, and I had to steady myself against the bark. My mind scrambled for reason. Maybe I'd carved it myself in some dazed state. Maybe this was all fatigue, hunger, dehydration. But the grooves were too deep, too deliberate, the sap too fresh. I hadn't written this. Something else had, something that knew me well enough to speak to me directly. I backed away, my boots crunching in the damp earth. The spiral still glowed faintly in the clearing. Its edges darkened like scorched soil, as though the ground itself had burned without flame. I wanted to tear my eyes away, but my body resisted. My gaze kept drawing inward, following the lines tighter and tighter until I swayed on my feet. The air grew heavy again, a damp heat pressing against my face, my chest filling my lungs like wet cloth. I forced myself to move. I turned from the clearing and staggered into the trees, every instinct screaming to break free of the spiral's pull. I didn't care about trails anymore, about navigation. I just needed distance, any distance. But no matter how far I walked, the forest bent itself back into the same shape. I'd press on for what felt like an hour, branches lashing against my arms, sweat stinging my eyes, and then I'd break through the brush into a space I recognized, a toppled cooler, a collapsed tent, a familiar log by the fire pit. Every sight I'd cataloged. Every one I thought I'd passed only once. I was walking through them again and again. Each time something had changed. A mug on the ground that hadn't been there before. A sleeping bag dragged halfway out of its tent. A message scratched faintly into the dirt, too blurred to read. The forest wasn't just trapping me, it was rearranging itself around me, rewriting itself. By the fourth return, I was shaking. My mouth was dry, my tongue swollen. Panic was closing in like a fist. I sat down hard on a stump, staring at my hands just to keep them from trembling. My thoughts kept circling back to the same impossible conclusion. This wasn't about getting lost. This wasn't about trails or maps. Something in this place was using me the same way it had used the others. I felt it again before I heard it, the hum rising through the earth. At first subtle, like the low murmur of water through stone, then louder, vibrating in my chest, rattling my teeth. I pressed my palms to the soil, and the shock of it nearly made me cry out. It was pulsing beneath the ground, alive, as though the forest floor was the skin of something vast beneath me. I stumbled back, but the hum followed. My vision blurred, my head swimming. Shapes flickered at the edge of my sight, shadows darting between trunks, just out of reach. I caught flashes of faces, too quick to hold on to, but always with the same hollow expression. And then the voice came again. Thomas. Not from the trees this time, not even from inside my skull. It came from the ground, rising with the hum, vibrating through my bones until it seemed to crawl up my spine. I staggered, clutching at my chest, fighting the urge to collapse. I forced myself to move forward, stumbling blindly, using sheer will to keep my legs moving. I told myself there had to be an edge to this place, a line where the influence ended. I told myself if I just pushed far enough, the world would right itself. And then ahead I saw light, a glow through the trees, faint but real. My chest surged with hope, and I broke into a desperate run, lungs burning, legs screaming. Branches clawed at my arms, but I didn't care. I ran until I burst into the open, until the trees fell away, and I found myself standing at the edge of a wide clearing I'd never seen before. At its center stood a structure, not a cabin, not a ranger outpost, older, rough. It looked like stone at first, but when I drew closer, I saw it was built from the stacked remains of campfire rings, rocks gathered from every abandoned site, piled higher and higher into a kind of tower. Around its base lay objects, boots, coolers, sleeping bags, lanterns, all the gear I had seen scattered at the campsites, now gathered here like offerings. The spiral had been carved into the ground around it, deeper, darker, so wide I had to step over its lines to approach. And carved into the stones themselves were words, layer upon layer, in dozens of different hands. I traced one with my fingers, heart hammering, "We are still here." Another, written beneath, "It will not let go." And then, deeper in the stack, in letters so faint I almost missed them, Thomas. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering to myself, no, it wasn't possible. I had never been here before. I had never written this. And yet the letters carved into stone had the slant, the stroke, the same style of my own handwriting. Behind me, the forest creaked. I turned, and my heart froze. The figures were back. Dozens of them, stepping silently into the clearing, forming a circle around me and the tower. Their faces were still slack, their eyes empty, but as they raised their hands again, palms outward, I noticed something new. Each palm bore a spiral, burned into the flesh. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the tower. The hum swelled into a roar, pressing against my skull until I thought it would split. And then, in perfect unison, they spoke. You are still here. The words shook the ground, rattling the stones of the tower, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. My vision wavered, the edges of the clearing blurring, as though the forest itself was bending, folding inward. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, screaming for it to stop. For a moment I thought it might. The hum faltered, the figures grew still, silence pressed in, and then a single voice broke it. A man's voice, low, calm, and terribly familiar. Thomas, come closer. I raised my head, the figures parted, and standing beyond them in the shadow of the trees was a ranger, uniform intact, hat brim pulled low, his face half hidden in shadow. But I knew him. Because it was me. I stared at him, and my body rebelled. Every muscle locked, every instinct screamed. It wasn't possible, but there I was, the same uniform, same weathered face, same lantern hanging from the same hand. Only he looked fresher, stronger, like he hadn't spent sleepless nights stumbling through this cursed maze of campsites. His eyes weren't hollow like the others, but they weren't mine either. Too steady, too certain. He stepped forward, boots crunching over the scorched spiral, and the figures bowed their heads as he passed. My throat tightened. My legs wanted to run, but where? The circle was sealed, the forest bent in ways I couldn't trust. I whispered, hoarse, "What are you?" He smiled faintly, the way I had smiled at nervous campers, trying to calm them before storms rolled in. Only it didn't calm me. It curdled something inside. "I'm what you leave behind when you stay too long," he said. His voice was mine, but deeper, heavier, as though dragged down by the weight of the earth itself. The others abandoned their shells. You keep fighting. That's why it chose you. The spiral, I croaked. The disappearances. You did this? He tilted his head. No, we did. The hum surged beneath us, the spiral glowing faintly red in the soil, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I swore I could feel it drawing blood upward, tugging at my veins like strings. My vision wavered, doubling, and for a split second I saw myself standing where he stood, saw him kneeling where I was. Two versions of the same man, flickering back and forth like alternating frames in a film reel. I clawed at my scalp, desperate to hold on to a single reality. No, I'm me. I'm me. He crouched down until we were eye level, and the lantern glow finally caught his face fully. My breath caught. It wasn't just me as I was now, it was me younger. My features less lined, eyes brighter, shoulders straighter. The version of me before years in the service wore me down, before loneliness and long nights bent me into something older than I was. You've been walking in circles for years, Thomas, he said softly, almost kindly. Out here, or in there. He tapped his chest. It doesn't matter. The spiral doesn't let go until you stop running. The circle of hollow-eyed figures raised their palms again, spirals glowing faintly like brands. Their voices rose together, thought weaving with the hum. Still here, still here, still here. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stand instead, staggering upright. If you're me, then you know I won't give in. I'll find a way out. He tilted his head again, almost pitying. They all said that. The tower of stones behind me groaned, shifting. I glanced back and saw that in the cracks between the rocks, eyes had opened. Dozens of them, wet and glistening, rolling to follow my every move. From the base seeped a thick, black fluid, spreading across the soil, filling the carved grooves of the spiral until it glistened like ink. The younger me reached out a hand. Come closer. You don't have to fight it anymore. You'll never leave these camps behind. Not really. Better to join what waits than to wear yourself out pretending. I stared at that hand, shaking, bile rising in my throat. The hum clawed at my chest, pulling me forward. For a moment, I wanted it. The release, the end of exhaustion, the relief of letting go. But then I remembered the footprints I'd seen circling my tent. Some small, children's. Families had come here, laughing, telling stories, never knowing what waited. And if I gave in now, if I let this spiral consume me, how many more would follow? I clenched my jaw, forcing my body to resist the pull. No, I whispered. Then louder. No. I raised the dead lantern in my hand like a weapon and swung. The glass shattered against the stone tower, shards scattering, metal twisting. The hum faltered, stuttered. The black fluid hissed where the glass struck, burning holes into the spiral's grooves. The circle of figures shrieked, not with their mouths, but with the hum itself, rising into a piercing wail that cut through the night. My younger self staggered back, his smile slipping, his form flickering like smoke and wind. I seized the moment. My legs moved before thought could stop them. I barreled through the circle, shoving past the hollow figures. Their skin was cold, damp, but they didn't resist. They only turned their heads to watch me go, eyes blank, mouths opening wide as the hum screeched from their throats. The forest erupted, trees bent inward, branches clawing at me, roots heaving up from the ground to snare my feet. I tripped, fell, scrambled up again. The spiral pulsed behind me, chasing me with its glow, with the echo of my own voice shouting my name. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My chest burned, my vision tunneled, and still I forced my legs to move, each step heavier than the last. The forest blurred into shadow and light, the hum rattling in my bones, the words still beating in time with my pulse. And then sudden silence. No hum. No footsteps. No glow. I stumbled forward, gasping, and found myself standing at the edge of the ridge. Below me stretched the familiar valley, the trail winding down toward where I'd left my truck. The dawn light painted the peaks gold. Birds sang. The world was normal again. For a long moment, I just stood there, trembling, unable to believe it. Somehow, I had broken free. But when I looked down at my hands, my blood ran cold. In the center of each palm, faint but unmistakable, was a spiral. The dawn light should have felt like salvation. I stood there at the ridge, chest heaving, watching the sun stretch over the valley. Birds called from the treetops, their notes sharp and familiar. The trail was visible, clear, solid, winding toward where I'd parked my truck days ago. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I let myself believe it was over. I'd survived. But then I looked at my hands. The spirals burned faintly in each palm, not scars, not bruises. Something deeper, like the skin itself, had been etched from the inside. They pulsed once, faintly, in rhythm with my heartbeat. I clenched my fists, shoved them into my pockets, and told myself it didn't matter. As long as I made it back to the truck, back to radio range, I could put this behind me. I started down the trail. Each step should have carried me farther from that clearing, but the deeper I went, the more wrong it felt. The valley air was too still. No breeze moved the trees. The bird calls had stopped. Even the sunlight felt strained, as though it was forcing itself through a veil. I walked faster. Sweat slicked my back despite the chill of morning. My boots crunched gravel, a sound so sharp in the silence it made me flinch. And then, faint but undeniable, came a second set of footsteps behind me. I froze. The sound stopped too. Slowly, I turned. The trail behind me was empty, winding back up toward the ridge. Nothing moved. No figures. No ranger. Just me. I told myself it was paranoia, exhaustion. I turned back and kept walking. Then the voice came, not a whisper, not the forest groan. Clear, crisp, only a few feet away. Thomas. I spun again, heart pounding. The trail was still empty, but the spiral in my palms pulsed hard enough to make my fingers twitch. I staggered forward, almost running now, forcing myself to focus on the switchbacks ahead. But each turn showed me the same view. The ridge above, the valley below, the same bend in the path. I passed a fallen pine I swore I'd seen before. Then again and again. My breath hitched. The world folded inward, pulling me in circles, making me its axis. My vision blurred with tears of rage and fear. I screamed into the trees, "I'm not staying here!" The silence that followed was heavier than any answer. I pushed harder, half stumbling, half running, until the trail broke into a clearing I hadn't expected. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Maybe I'd found a side path, a way out. But when I looked closer, my stomach twisted. It wasn't a new clearing. It was the clearing. The spiral still burned faintly in the soil, the tower of stones looming, the lantern hissing on its log, and standing at the far edge, waiting for me, was myself. Not younger this time, not fresher, older. His face was more lined than mine, hair silver at the temples, eyes sunken with years of sleepless nights. He leaned on the same ranger's staff I'd once carried in my 20s, but his grip was weak, fingers trembling. When he spoke, his voice rasped like dry leaves. "You don't leave, Thomas. You only change." The ground trembled. The tower cracked, stones tumbling, the eyes between them rolling wildly. The figures emerged again from the tree line, dozens more this time, each one carrying the same spiral in their palms, each one lifting their hands in unison. Their chant rose, low and steady. "Still here, still here, still here." My older self shuffled closer, raising a withered hand toward me. The spiral glowed bright in his palm, brighter than all the others. "You've seen what comes before," he whispered. "Now see what comes after." The chant swelled, the spirals in my hands seared with heat, forcing my fists open. My knees buckled and I dropped to the dirt, the spiral in the ground drawing my body toward its center, as though the earth itself had turned to a whirlpool. I clawed at the soil, screamed until my throat tore, but the forest drowned me out. The hum returned, louder than before, vibrating in my skull until thought itself unraveled. The world bent inward, light folding, sound warping, everything circling tighter and tighter toward that blackened center. And then I saw them. All of them. The missing campers, families, children. Their faces flickered through the crowd, not hollow now, but twisted in silent screams. They weren't gone, they weren't dead. They were still here, trapped in the spiral, their voices woven into the hum. And as I stared at them, I felt myself unraveling too. My edges fraying, my voice being pulled out of me, dragged into the chant. Still here, still here, still here. I wasn't standing anymore. I wasn't kneeling. I was falling. Not into darkness, not into earth, but into endless rings of myself. Young, old, broken, smiling, hollow-eyed, each one whispering my name. Thomas.